technically, we're giving more people more money. Hello, and welcome to Thought Crime. You're listening to episode 22, Usury Special. I am your host, Donald Reagan, joined as always by my co-host, Margaret Thrasher. Margaret, how's it going?
Very good. Happy to be here.
Wonderful. It's good in this, the new year of 2019. We're excited. We're ready to rock and roll. And we've got a good episode for you today about the Federal Reserve. But do we have any opening statements before that? Unfortunately, Margaret just lost her job at BuzzFeed, part of the Verizon merger.
I was a plant all along, just gaining intel.
Mm-hmm.
No, actually, my job is extremely safe and sound. No matter how much I bother my bugman coworkers with my answers.
And that's a quote. And you can quote that. Anyways.
Oh, news! I got engaged.
Yes? Doxing. Okay,
no, I
so...
feel like it's good. I mean, a part of this whole thing is promoting good moral character.
The 14.
Right? So,
yeah, the 14...
I have to prove as I have to some degree
statements.
that I'm not all talk here. So here's
my
proof.
Right. Yeah, no, that actually is a good point. And congratulations, by the way. Congratulations. So, do we have any other... is there any other stuff that we want to get into here before we start off the episode?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends how much we want to derail ourselves to begin with. Like, I don't know, do you want to talk about the Indian dude being the drum at all, since that was the rage?
That was stupid.
There's Trump saying that he's going to reopen the government, like, yesterday or something.
That was also stupid?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really understand what the long game is. Maybe not talk about it, since I feel like I don't have anything useful to say about it, because I don't understand what's going on.
Last episode I was talking up all our big brain takes. This episode I'm talking up our small brain takes. That was stupid. This government shutdown is fake and gay. It's all Zog, bro. Duh. You know, some small brain takes.
Orange Man bad. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't know.
You can find some.
I thought that like we were actually. I mean, I think everybody thought we were actually kind of getting somewhere after when the government shut down, and then he seemed to be talking kind of tough, and we were all like, "Yeah, you finally understand that you have to do this," and then this came out, so.
It really seems to me like at this point, it seems to me like the way that the Trump presidency works is essentially that he's getting bad advice from somebody who's a bad actor.
Yeah, you know,
who's close to him.
keeps saying that, and I'm sure that's true to a degree, but it's like he's not stupid. So at some point, can't he recognize that this is not good advice? Like, I guess my wondering is.
Well, it could be bad advice.
Like, did he really think he would appease anybody who is like someone that like didn't like him or whatever? And he's like, okay, I'll reopen the government. Like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, it could be bad advice the same way that taking a loan from the mob is bad advice. You might not necessarily have an option there, but it's and there's also the aspect of he might be used to politics in a bit of a more civil age, when things like this, when you might have been able to have a little bit more respectability, and actually come to the table and negotiate with people. But you think for somebody who wrote the art of the deal, he would be able to.
It's just always like you've already been there for 2 years, too, guy. Like, you know that nobody is doing anything in good faith. Like I don't believe he's that. Like, dense schooled enough to think that other people are going to come at him in good faith at this point. So, I guess I don't know who he's listening to, if he is, or why he thinks it's a good idea. But I guess we'll just see. But I think it's annoying, but I've been quite annoyed with Trump for a while now, so.
Yeah, I'm gonna follow the Trump rule, the 72-hour rule before I comment on anything.
You're gonna trust
we'll go from
the plan.
there. I'm a plan truster, you know. No, but I think a lot of these things move like a glacier. It's the slow churn
It
of the
doesn't
cultural
have
zeitgeist.
to. It does not have to.
Yeah, but like, you know, whatever. What is this, an episode of Heel Turn? What are you, Richard Spencer, talking about the Apollonian ideal and how everyone's
Is that what
everyone's not being radical enough?
Is that what I said?
Basically.
No, what I'm saying is it doesn't. You don't have to sit here and be like, oh, we have to go through, years of formalities before we do anything. It's like, dude, you already took 2 years to get to this point. You should have held out. Like, you were in the upper hand there, and you should have held out, and you didn't. And that's annoying.
Yeah, see, that's the thing that's really the thing that I don't get is like he wrote Art of the Deal. He should know these basic pressure tactics for like how to get somebody to do this whole thing. So
yeah.
But
don't tell me fucking Nancy Pelosi is outsmarting you, dude. Because if she is, like, yeah, you put on a good face there for your entire life. Because I'm real disappointed in your deal making abilities. Then.
Mm-hmm. I did read some of Art of the Deal. I just was looking at a couple of the pages.
I haven't read any of it. I have the book, but I haven't read it.
Oh yeah, that's where I was reading.
Okay.
I was reading it to you in the Trump. It's written like how he speaks. I was with my friend. Won't mention who he is. Big league guy in the financial markets, and he said we were talking about this thing, and he said,
"Oy vey, compromise."
Right.
But anyways, yeah, I guess we can move on from there because there's nothing quite newsworthy coming out of our mouths about that.
Right. There's no. These are some leftover, warmed over takes here.
Yeah.
And that's not what we do on this podcast.
Throw the leftovers in the microwave.
Oh my god! They talked about throwing my opinion in the oven. That's not what we do here on this show, though. We don't. We're not this small-brained. What are the weekly politics? Dance on a string like a little puppet master. That's not what we do. Okay. This is. We're more of a metapolitics, light history. You can imagine us as a cross between myth of the 20th century and Joe Rogan.
Oh. Okay, wait. I had a comment, a personal life comment, really fast. So you know how when you have people in your life that you care about, but they're just kind of dumb, and so then you find yourself needing to explain to them shit like the media hates Trump because blah blah, just like the really basic stuff so that they can understand. Anyway, so I was talking with my mom, and I totally realized she's just a mom version of Joe Rogan because she's just always like, whoa, why? Whoa, like, why? And it's just like, I don't know, so I find myself explaining all these things, and she always acts like they're the, like, most amazing takes she's ever heard, except she doesn't do DMT. But,
yeah, I was going to say, hey, Margaret, have you ever smoked DMT?
But I was, like, just laughing to myself today, being like, my mom's totally Mom Joe Rogan. But it, like, makes me exercise my opinions to the extreme, because she's constantly asking me to explain everything, so...
Well, I feel like I had some hot takes on just things in general, but I can't remember any of them. We're doing this as a little bit of an impromptu episode here, so...
Well, whatever. Just move on. You can think of something you want to say later.
I was busy. Well, I would recommend that if this is your first show, you should also take a look at our archives. We've got some good episodes. We did one on Professor Theodore Kaczynski and industrialized society and its future. It's a good one. You can find us at soundcloud.com/thoughtcrimeusa. Don't even bother with the twitter.com/thoughtcrimeusa. Get at me.
Are you ever going to use the Twitter in any seriousness or no?
To ask me after. Oh, that's true. That is one thing. You can ask me after. I probably will be more active on Twitter after my appearance on the Joe Rogan experience later this week. So it'll probably be my DMs will probably be getting blown up after that.
All right.
Anyways, so moving on. The Federal Reserve. Do we want to just jump right into that topic?
Yes. Let us go for it. So, we're talking about the Federal Reserve. Do we want to talk about like what led up to the Federal Reserve being created, or do you want to just start with the Federal Reserve itself and go forward?
Well, I think that the easiest place to start here would be a little bit of history of central banking in general. And the king of central reserve and fractional reserve lending would be the Rothschild family. And how they got their start was back in the Middle Ages, like the late Middle Ages around there. You had a lot of kings that wanted to finance wars against neighboring countries, and the problem with that was that you only have a limited amount of funds. So basically, what would happen is you would have loans. You would have people who would take out loans from a rich banking family so that they don't have to tax the population, because when you tax the population, then they're going to, eventually they're going to revolt if they're overly taxed by their king. So you're going to get a bank that'll finance your war, and then all they have to do is pay back whatever loan they take out with interest. So they put up all their gold, and they're like, hey, king, here you go. Here's your gold. You got to pay me that back with interest. Meanwhile, they're going to the other kingdom that they're fighting and doing the same thing. So no matter who wins the war, they're getting their loan back plus interest. So that's kind of the history of the Red Shield family.
And so the Bank of England started when they were warring with France, right?
I believe so. Most of those central banks generally come from a time like that.
I believe it was the King Louis guy.
Pretty much anytime you start a central bank is usually because a government is trying to spend beyond its means, and that's a method for them to do that. So that's the first. I believe the Bank of England was the first
Bank of England
actual.
Pretty much what they all got. I mean. Yeah, the Federal Reserve has kind of like usurped it now as like the main one, but the Bank of England is originally what it was starting to be modeled off of when they started saying let's have central banks in the United States.
Yeah, but that concept of fractional reserve lending has been around before that.
Oh, I mean, if you just think about a bank like fractional reserve banking, it's like a natural. It's naturally what these people would start doing.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just like a natural progression of people running a bank. Is the next thing you're doing is saying, well, I'm gonna loan out more than I have because hey, ain't no one coming back for these reserves.
Right. Well, I guess what I'm saying is this concept of lending out the money at interest and lending out more than you actually own, and kind of playing both sides, so that you're gonna end up taking in more money than you're actually lending out. That's been going on for quite some time before there was an official central bank. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the Bank of England started after the defeat by France of England in the 1690 Battle of Bachy Head, I don't know. And England wanted to rebuild itself as a global power. So that's definitely a common thread, is that a lot of times when these types of things happen is when a country is trying to kind of globalize itself, if you will. England had no choice but to build a powerful navy. No public funds were available. And the credit of William III's government was so low in London that it was impossible for him to borrow about 1.2 million pounds that the government wanted. To induce subscription to the loan, the subscribers were incorporated by the name of the Governor Company of the Bank of England. and was given exclusive possession of the government's balances. It was the only limited liability corporation allowed to issue banknotes. So basically, that is the start of that. Do we want to move forward to what we had in the Federal Reserve?
Yeah,
Or
but
should
I
we
mean,
talk
like,
about-
I guess specifically from the Bank of England, that's also kind of what led up to the American Revolution, right? Because while the colonies were having their own money, it was like colony fiat currency. They were just like printing the money and using it, and basically, I don't remember what year it was, but it was like after Benjamin Franklin went and visited England, and then they passed the Currency Act, and they were like, "Oh, you can't print any more money. You have to borrow it from the Bank of England," and then that's what caused like a lot of issues in the colonies.
Well, it was the right to issue coinage, right?
Well, they basically said that, yeah, like you can't make any more money. You have to be borrowing now from the Bank of England. And then basically a kind of like depression hit in the colonies because they weren't allowed to make their own money anymore to keep up with their own demands like they were. And
I guess what I'm saying is that the right to issue coinage was actually a big thing in the American Revolution. And you had competing currencies amongst the states until I believe it was after the Civil War that they were all centralized. But you would have, different states would have their different paper money that they would print. Yes, that was it there. So then, after that, you had the first Bank of the United States and the second Bank of the United States. Both made commercial loans, deposits, purchase securities, blah, 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 blah. And
the also interesting tidbit is the War of 1812 went on between both of those banks. And so, like, that's the thing with the U.S. is, like, it's always been a big war. And then they sold the public on having a central bank to control everything so, like, it won't be unstable again. But then when the first bank ended, then you had the War of 1812. And then after that, they sold the public again on the idea of a central bank, which was the second one. And then...
Right, and then... Continue, go on.
And then I was going to say, well, then the second bank, that's the one that when they tried to get rechartered, Jackson said no, and then basically just took all of the money out of the central bank and then stuck it in all the state banks. And so then it was like, I don't know what that was, like 1830s, 1840s. And so then, I mean, it was like a 70-year period where, basically America got to the point where like all of these people started kind of like monopolizing the different industries, and so basically at that point there was different like bank runs and stuff, basically because JP Morgan started like fucking with the money because he was funding everything. And then I think it's called the Panic of 1907 was like a huge one where basically JP Morgan started a rumor that like the Knickerbocker or whatever bank was going to go down, and then basically And basically then in response to that, all of the people told the people, well, if we have a central bank, we'll stabilize the currency, and you won't lose all your life savings again. So that's just kind of very much repeatedly the way they try to sell the need for a central bank.
And this is the kind of thing with central banks is that it's proposed, it's sold as being more stable and creating more stability. But with any centralized system, you get this situation where it's like, because it's centralized, once there's an issue with that, everybody's roped into whatever problems the centralized system is having.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just that, though. It's that the Federal Reserve is made up of the same people who were causing all the destabilization to begin with, so there is no different practices. So that's the other thing is that the public was sold on.
Is that when you don't have a decentralized system, once that one centralized system becomes corrupt or is corrupt from its founding, and people are able to scam off the margins, then the amount that they're able to scam is greater, and it affects everybody.
I don't know. See, that's kind of the situation. I agree with you because I think central banking is fine when it's done correctly.
Well, this is my point. Is that that's the whole situation with like inflation and things like that. Like, it's being sold as keeping the currency more stable. But it's like, why is a dollar now worth far less than it was in 1890? It's clearly not doing a good job at actually stabilizing the value of the currency. So what I'm saying is that from an anti-fragile perspective, it's worse because a problem with the centralized system is going to affect the entire system instead of a small portion of it. And then from a overall stability perspective, it's worse because that centralized system slowly degrading the value of the currency and the quality of living is affecting. There's no alternative, basically. It's kind of that old libertarian argument of when you have the government, there's no competition, so the corruption in it affects everybody, and you can't. There's no option, no way to opt out.
Okay, well, I have a very different view of it. I think that central banking has been done in the past, and it has been done in a proper way, and that it's fine to do it. It's just that you have to be doing it in, like, the good faith for the population. You can't be running it from private corporations. And so, like, I don't know. So, like, the way that I'm pretty certain has been played out in history has shown that, like, almost all these central banks are privately owned. And, like, this is the problem. Right. Because they're then operating in a way to maximize their own profits rather than to benefit the economic needs of the society.
Right, and that's a really crazy aspect of this too. Just the concept that you're going to let a group of individuals decide the issuance of currency of a country.
Oh, and not just individuals, fucking bankers themselves that all own other privately owned banks. Like, most of the people in the board of the Federal Reserve are from other banks.
Yeah, like conflict of interest.
Yeah, and that was the thing that, like, basically got completely exposed to the public in 2008, and not much seemed to happen after that, where they realized that they were all getting kickbacks because, fucking Morgan and Wells Fargo and all those people have people on the board. And what was it? I think it was $4 trillion in total was, like, in that circle jerk of the Federal Reserve to their own banks that they have board members in, was given back to themselves, basically. So, yeah, you have this institution that's sold as saying they'll stabilize your currency because there'll be a central power that will regulate the private banks, but that central agency is run by the private banks. And so all of this, and so it's like, in any time there is a problem, it's just baked into the cake for them to bail themselves out.
Right. And talking about some of this central bank nefarious activities of a central bank, an illustrative point might be the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis. Should we go into that just now, just kind of to illustrate for the audience how some of these scams work, basically?
Yeah.
Okay, so the history of the 2008 crisis is basically that there was a push at the federal level to increase home ownership because home ownership is a marker of economic success. It's kind of like the same thing that we're seeing now with the subprime college tuition crisis. Yep. If you have a college degree, you're going to make more money.
Your women's studies degree.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the degree, people with degrees make more money. Therefore, if you give people degrees, they'll make more money. People with houses tend to have more money. Therefore, if you give somebody a house, they'll be better off. So because of that, they were trying to... The market was basically saturated with people who qualified for home loans getting home loans. So in order to increase home sales, loans were extended out to people who wouldn't regularly qualify for loans. And what you saw then was people basically, if you had a pulse, you could take out a home loan. So you had all these people who didn't have the economic fundamentals to back up a significant mortgage, and they were all getting home loans. So then what happened on top of that is that all of these mortgages were bundled together in financial instruments called mortgage-backed securities. Mm-hmm. And different, basically they're a package of a bunch of these mortgages, and they're graded A, B, C, D, E, or F, whatever, for their likelihood of, how stable of an investment they are if people are going to pay back these mortgages. And what happened after that was essentially fraud, where you have all these, unemployed Obama phone users, if you will.
Obama phone.
You had all these hotheads and Democrat voters, that all these big government advocates were taking out tons of home loans, and they were all being given A+ ratings. These are totally secure. If you buy,
it's just crazy to think about like monetizing debt like that to begin with as well.
Right, I think this is talking about kind of the history,
and it's from the fractional reserve system, so it's money that was loaned out that never existed, and now it's getting monetized again on another level.
Right. I think this is kind of a good way to start talking about this topic, to kind of relate it to something real for people.
Yeah.
So on top of after they bundled all these mortgages together into financial instruments, there was essentially fraud in the rating, insurance rating for these, and then on top of that, banks were selling them back and forth to each other. So as the speculative cost of real estate increased, the value of these mortgages increased, and then on top of that, there was something called I believe it's a credit default swap, which was another scammy financial instrument, which is basically an insurance policy on one of these mortgage-backed securities, that if the people defaulted on their mortgages, it was basically an insurance policy that if somebody defaults on their mortgage, you will get paid. Like the company backing that investment will pay you some amount. So it became this sort of like win-win. Everybody's making money. Property values are going up until people stopped being able to pay their mortgages and started defaulting. Once they started defaulting, then property values collapsed. The value of all these mortgage-backed securities basically evaporated overnight, and there was a massive shortfall where these banks had all this money on their books, but it actually was nothing.
Yeah.
And then aside from that, because these mortgage-backed securities had been sold around to bank after bank after bank, you have $10 million of mortgages, then you sell it for $11 million of mortgages, and then you sell it for $15 million, $25 million. By the time the mortgage was actually defaulted on, it was owned by some bank 10 steps down the road.
Yeah.
So it was totally a scam, basically. And then who bailed it out at the end of the day? It was the American taxpayer. Basically had to cover all of these bad investments.
Yeah. When you see that FDIC insured thing, it means we're insuring this with your labor.
Yeah, and it's not like people think that there's this free market and that when you make a bad investment you have to pay for it, but that's clearly not what happened. You only have to pay for it
when you're an honest person.
Yeah, and they were.
That's your penalty for being like a good, honest white person.
Yeah, right. You worked really hard. You were an honest person. Let's see how much money we can squeeze out of you.
Yeah, but I mean, I think you made with talking about the bundling. I mean, that's exactly what they're doing too right now with the student loans. And I mean, they made it so like you can't even like say you're bankrupt and not pay for it. So I don't know. It'll be an interesting thing when all of that blows out.
All right, so yeah, we're talking about the 2008 housing crisis. And I think this is just a good illustrative example of how some of these kind of weird financial instruments work. In the way that there's layers of obfuscation from what's actually happening to the public, so people don't realize how big of a scam the whole thing is.
Well, and that's the other thing too is we're totally in the depression from that outfall of the 2008. And
that's another thing is that practice didn't stop. Mortgage-backed securities are still a thing. People are still trading these based on inflated property values.
Yeah, and the Federal Reserve's solution was not only to bail out these banks and stuff, but it was the quantitative easement. So literally, they just basically threw money in to all of those banks at 0% interest, and just
you're getting rewarded. You're basically just getting rewarded for making really bad financial decisions,
which is the only expected outcome when you set up a whole system to regulate. You told the banking system it could regulate itself by setting up the Federal Reserve System, which was all designed from bankers to begin with. So it's like all of this was coming. All of this is like the culmination of in a way like what we asked for by setting up this system to begin with. Like I wouldn't expect it to have gone any other way. To expect it to have gone any other way would be to be stupid.
And you were saying that the bailouts totaled to about $4 trillion.
Well, that was $4 trillion from the Federal Reserve into like conflicts of interest. So I don't remember what the total number was, but just $4 trillion is what ended up going to like people who were on the Federal Reserve Board that were like also in Chase, Citibank, Wells Fargo, like all that's the money that went to them. So it's like same people on the board got money. Their companies got money bailout.
Maybe that was one of the rounds of quantitative easing.
Yeah, I mean that's what that was the only solution that was ever given, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, I don't know everything about all of this, but there was like 3 different rounds or something of just handing out all the money.
It was basically a buyback of. Okay, here we go. So yeah, it was basically a buyback of the bad mortgages and then quantitative easing on top of that. So it looks like basically the Fed bought back a bunch of these mortgage-backed securities to the tune of about $2 trillion. What's a million times a million? That's a trillion, right?
No, that's. I do think that's a trillion.
Yeah, it's a trillion.
After a billion, I don't remember how many zeros goes to what, but I think that's a trillion.
Okay, so just doing a little research here, it looks like the total was about $4 trillion for the whole thing, and so that's about the GDP of America in 1 year, I believe.
And you know what?
The total
$5
GDP
billion
is about
for a wall is just too much.
No, that would be ludicrous. And we
gotta give all of this money as bonuses to the bankers for getting us out of the depression.
Clearly. I believe that's also about the cost of the Iraq War.
Jesus.
Looks like the Iraq. No, you know what?
The same people who cost us that fucking much to begin with.
Wow. This is funny here. Both the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, as of 2017. Cost the taxpayers a total of $2.4 trillion. So it's basically 2 Iraq and Afghanistan wars.
Makes me
we could have gotten so much more out of it for that. We could have taken all of China out for that.
We could have nuked them all. But yeah, no, it's completely ludicrous. It's totally a cabal running the money system. It's a monopoly of money. I don't know. You always think of monopolies on like industries and stuff, but it's literally a monopoly on money.
Yeah, you can tell. You can kind of when you start looking at the fundamentals of what's going on in a lot of these operations. What they're doing is basically just spinning around the money a bunch of times and making it multiply while not really doing anything.
Well, they have to wave their hands a lot so people don't see the truth for what it is, and the truth for what it is like it's bullshit. They're just making shit up.
And now the new thing as well, and part of what this I believe is spurred by is the new Americans that are coming in, the new working class of hardworking Democrat voters.
Than you and I.
Clearly, because they're not spoiled.
They're not questioning the Federal Reserve banking system.
Right, they're not spoiled and not accepting our complex financial instruments that we're trying to shove down their throat. That's what you people do. You see this scam that I'm trying to pull on you, and you're like, I don't want to participate in this. You're spoiled. I believe that's a direct quote from Mr. William Kristallnacht. No, but the new element of this that they're adding to it, because the real estate market has slowed down somewhat. So the new thing they're doing is using basically subprime auto loans and subprime college tuition loans, which is really pathetic when you think about it. That
oh, it's disgusting.
What they're doing, instead of selling like a house, which is something that's actually practical, they're kind of selling people on these luxury goods or status symbols.
Cars only ever depreciate in value. Like at least with a home, you usually have the chance at some point in your ownership that you're going to be able to sell it for more. Like, if you wait right, you will. A car? There's no reason to be financing a fucking car.
Yeah, you're also getting, I mean, you're getting value out of it, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
and then the student loans, I mean, that both, you know, kind of makes me make fun of people for being stupid, but then at the same time, it's like, I guess I shouldn't make fun of them. It's just really sad. Like, it's the same thing.
Well, people have been told their whole life.
People were just sold on it, and these poor people have, like, you know, half of them have, like, 90 IQs. They shouldn't be there, but they were told that they need to, and they, you know, a lot of these people, they get so stressed out, they can't deal with it. They drop out after 2 years, and, you know, they have all this debt now that, like, what are they going to just be in paying their, I don't know, like, waitress salaries just towards these loans that never came of anything at the end? It's very predatory.
Right. So I'm looking up here, just real quick. Oh, this doesn't, this won't be a good one. I think this is from Germany. There's a chart here of IQ by college degree. When we're looking through here.
Oh, what do we got on engineering?
So, looks like engineering has an average IQ of about 110. Huh. So that's, you know, and we know some engineers that are rocking around right around there.
I would know a number of them. It might be a little below that, but they're fine.
Right, but also, I mean, 110 is a good. I mean, that's about one standard.
That's the IQ of that should be the average IQ of everybody in the college. You know, like there should be nobody below average IQ in a college setting.
That should be the minimum. That should be the minimum IQ. Because 110, that's about like one standard deviation away from the norm. Yeah. Okay, so that's like your upper 25%. Of the population. Surprisingly, this is kind of funny. This is an IQ. Oh, sorry, wait. Oh no, okay. IQ versus attractiveness of the degree. This is funny. The one that topped out the chart is social sciences, and it's by Psychology Today.
Wait, they said psychology has the highest IQ.
No, the Psychology Today published this study, but it's funny they ranked social science as the highest.
Like social science has the highest IQ.
Yeah, which is surprising.
That's not true.
Yeah, you never know. You never know. Got the highest verbal IQ, that's for sure.
I highly doubt that. It's just because fucking psychology isn't the social science, and those are the fucking people that take the test. Who else takes that? Like, I never take an IQ test. Have you taken an IQ test? Who takes IQ tests? Right.
Oh, this is kind of funny. This is white IQ by heat.
By heat?
Like the hotter the average the average temperature in the region where white people live and their average IQ.
Oh, what's the trend?
It totally goes along with like the cold winters theory. The colder the average temperature, the higher the average IQ. That's kind of funny.
Maybe that's why I'm so smart. I'm from the cold land.
Okay, let's see. Oh, here we go. This is a better chart here. This looks like it's from a good study. I can't tell. It's got the doctor's name on it.
From a good study? Dude, I've met a lot of people with doctor in their name that ain't smart.
Well, anyways, so this is a graph of percentage of female majors and average IQ. So this is looking pretty good here. So yes, there is a trend. The higher percentage of female majors, the lower the average IQ.
For sure.
For sure. So in this, from this one, engineering looks like it has an average IQ of about 125.
See, I was
sounds a little bit
I
more
feel
right.
like the average of an engineering IQ is probably more like 120. I mean, it definitely would depend on the school, but
yeah,
I would. From at least my understanding of associating IQs with, like, when you talk to people and the levels of conversations, I would say in my experience, kind of the average engineer seemed to be more around a 120 IQ with very critical thinking skills coming naturally.
Yeah, this chart seems to reflect my personal experience a little bit more. You've got physics and astronomy, on average, is going at about 135. Yeah, I was
gonna say that's hitting the autistic range.
I was gonna say all those people are autistic, so that makes sense. Mathematics 130 sounds about right.
All autistic.
Those people are autistic, but they're not
That's the thing
autistic
about
enough.
engineers are like the cusp. Where
Math
they're
majors-
like almost autistic.
Math majors are smart enough to be autistic, but not so smart where you're like, this guy's way smarter than me. I understand why he's so
they're
autistic.
just autistic in the way that it's like you're smart, but you're
Or it's
fucking
like,
annoying.
You're a fucking asshole.
Yeah.
Well, it's all the way down. We've got education at about 110, and social work is coming in at right about 110. You think it's lower?
I think it's 100.
Well, we'll see.
But
that's those are the people.
So easy to get through. I mean, this could be if this was like 20 years ago, I might buy some of this stuff a little more. 20, 30 years ago, but today I don't buy it.
And social work is at about 100.
Yeah, I'm not surprised there. That one probably sounds about right. What's the college majors that's below 100 IQ average?
Public administration.
I was political science.
Family sciences, leisure studies, and education. Oh yeah, this study here has education at right around 100.
Okay, that sounds about
so
right.
You get different numbers based off of what study you look at.
Okay.
But
anyways.
The overall, what we're seeing is that there's a lot of these degrees. Think about the college that you're at and how many people are going to some of these low IQ majors.
Well, but also,
and what you're
it's
having,
not even just that, but there's so many people that just go for like 1 or 2 years and then stop.
Right. Yeah, so basically you're getting the same thing you had with subprime mortgages. You're lowering the bar to entry, you're bringing in more people, and these people aren't going to be able to pay off, taking out $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 a year in loans.
Oh man, yeah, like one of
this is
my
ridiculous.
old roommates, she went to college for 2 years, and she went to an expensive college, and she had like something like around $30,000 of loans.
Yeah,
for 2 years
ridiculous.
and nothing to show for it, and you have like more loans than like $30,000. That's just ridiculous to have that much debt in the middle of your 20s with like nothing to show for it. I don't know.
It's a down payment on a house.
Exactly.
So then on top of that, you've got this new thing that's come out. They're already getting ready for the next round of scams after the student loan crisis. Because I mean, these aren't getting paid back.
Well, I mean, it's high time that everyone just stop paying their like. I really do think that everybody with student loan should somehow get on some student loan forum and all get some day where they just stop paying. Because like, what are you gonna do?
Right.
And the thing is,
don't pay back your loans. Don't pay your taxes.
If people didn't pay the student
I would never
loans,
advocate.
If people didn't
pay
pay their
taxes.
student loans, I don't actually think it would hurt the economy. I don't know 100%, but I'm pretty sure it would only hurt the universities. Because the federal government would be like, well, shit, we can't keep funding you now, and so they would have to they'd have to gut so much out of their universities.
Yeah, that's a big thing. A lot of when these defaults happen, it basically scares the lending institutions.
Exactly. And the lending institutions.
So, but the only thing,
almost everybody gets their student loans from a government. It's not from private banks. I mean, some people might get some from private banks, but almost all of it is literally federal money.
It probably would ripple through the economy.
It would probably do something,
but
I don't think it would be the same effect as the housing crash.
Yeah, well, this is the whole thing. Is the economy to a large extent is just made up. It's based on people's confidence in the economy.
Well, exactly, and I think there's enough people that are disconnected from the universities and the student loan and all this problem. Like, there's plenty of people that this just wouldn't affect at all. That I feel like life would go on pretty much as normal, and basically it would just be the fucking gender studies, political science, like bullshit stuff in the universities that would suffer, and that would be a wonderful day.
Yeah, this is basically our modern monetary theory episode here. Mike's monetary theory.
Well, this isn't monetary theory.
It kind of is.
What, saying don't pay back your loans because we want part of the university?
Oh no, just talking about how the economy is basically based off of how people feel, not.
Oh, but
at this point, it's become so different from the.
Now, you're getting at that question of what is money, right? Like, it's. All money ever has been is the confidence in something, which is why the gold back thing is so attractive, even though it's unnecessary.
So,
is because you just
before we get to that, I want to wrap up this modern scam that we're dealing with now with colleges. So you got colleges, and then the newest one is auto loans. You get a lot of people who are taking out basically $30,000 worth of loans right away in auto payments. Big screen TV, VR loans.
Electronic phones.
It's going to be a loan.
They do have the phones already. I didn't know that because it's been so long since I've had a like traditional carrier. But my fiance was telling me that the last time he went in to get a phone, that they said you can't even purchase it. Like they were saying you have to make payments, and he basically argued with him enough that they separated his into only 2 payments so he could get out of the way. But literally, like you have to finance your phone.
Yeah, it's the hyper-financialization of everything. And when you hyper-financialize things, it becomes a situation where you're paying a little bit at a time, and you don't realize how much you're paying just to the financial institution to lend you that line of credit. But again, we're getting off track here. The next thing is these auto loans. You're getting people taking out $30,000 to buy a brand new car. And I don't have the specific demographic breakdowns on who's taking out these loans, but it seems to me like a lot of the people who at least I see doing this in the world, and who I would not be surprised if, or a lot of the people who are doing this, is some of these new Americans, if you will, these people with a better work ethic, and they're kind of going after these aspirational consumer goods that are. They might not necessarily have the money to support, but it gives them the high status so that they can kind of fit in, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I just see a lot of young people also falling for stuff like that. Just because I think they just don't have they don't have nearly as much money as the generation before them had at their age.
Yeah, and that's a whole other ball of wax for why that's happening.
Yeah.
Anyway, so moving on. Do we want to get...
I would give my wise word of advice here. Don't ever finance a fucking car. There is no reason to do that. You can't purchase the car. You can't afford the car now. You can't afford the car later. Just buy a car you can afford.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all I like. It's insane to me. I didn't even know financing cars was a thing for a long time. And then I was like, I can't believe I was talking to somebody like a few years ago, and they were telling me about their car payments, and I was like, what the fuck do you mean? And then I was like, anyways, I guess I should have known this was a thing, but like I have never bought a car worth more than $2,000, so
I believe the Model T was let's see, the first Model T was the equivalent, let's see. I believe the Model T had an interesting financing program. I'm trying to remember what it was.
Like when it first came out?
Yeah, I believe they were, there was some interesting financing program with these.
I mean, I guess if you can finance something at 0% interest, it's okay, but I wonder how many of these things are like that.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. There was something where it was like a pretty legit financing program they would do to try and get people to start.
Henry Ford was like the based goy of the one goy running something.
Right. Yeah, I don't have it here. Actually, well, here's something.
Well,
okay, this is interesting.
If it was a goy, I might be like, I will.
Well, here we go. Okay.
Trust you a little more.
So in 1925, a Model T cost $260, which is the equivalent of $3,000 today. Okay?
Woo!
Or $3,714. So actually about $4,000. So inflation like a mofo. But this is the thing. So the first year the car was produced, first year the Model T was produced, 1909, it was $825, which at the time, in current cost, is equivalent to about $23,000. So that's like a Tesla Model S or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So by 1919, a Model T cost the equivalent of today $7,000. The next year it was $5,000. So what you see there is, once the economy of scale came up, the price went down. Yeah. You don't see that with consumer goods today. You see them stay at this high introductory price, except for things like, television or, something like that where they want you to have that so you can have the...
That was also getting, more and more phased out to, try to get you to buy it. They take the price down.
Yeah, but that's for, a quarter, a quarter of a year. They'll do that. Yeah. What I'm saying is that here, it would be reasonable that you could save for 3 months and buy a brand new car. That's not really the way it works today anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I mean, and the I guess an insidious thing about it too is that with all of this finance everything, and even if you can't afford it now, you can still have it now. Yeah, I mean, it just erodes moral character in a way. I mean, like, was it Benjamin Franklin and the penny pinching thing, and just being like low time preference in general. It's just eroding it, even in young white people. You don't see it as much as you used to, and that I just
nowadays
think is sad,
you have the
because
whole.
I think it's a very good like moral fiber to be the kind of person that like waits and works hard and saves to do something.
Right. Now you have people who are like renting couches and big screen TVs and shit like that.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah,
and then
the corruption of the moral
they have
character.
The gall to act like living expenses are so high. It's like, what are you?
I have to pay $50 a month for my couch.
Yeah, it's like I don't.
Like, how ridiculous is this?
Okay, it's called living within your means, and it's actually fairly doable, to be honest. I mean, you and I both know we've had long stints living like under the far under the poverty line. You can do it just fine if you're smart.
Right. Okay, so moving on. What did we want to talk about next? We want to go into the current financial system with the Federal Reserve. Do you want to talk about something else and then go to a break?
We step back. After talking about all that stuff, I mean, is there something that's unclear about how it works?
The financial reserve system?
The Federal Reserve, yeah.
Or sorry, the Federal Reserve System. I don't think there's anything unclear about it, but we haven't explained it yet.
Okay. Well, I guess
I think we should explain
more of like an example rather than the explanation of the theory.
I think we should really get into the Federal Reserve maybe in the second hour here, and then So I don't know if there's anything else you want to talk about to round out the first hour.
No, yeah, I think we should just go, I guess, into a little bit into how it works. It's really not that complicated, so I don't think it'll take too long. And then I would like to talk about other things that have gone on in history that show alternatives, and then maybe some of our own ideas of what we think, because I have some ideas of what I think could be something that people could work towards.
So, one thing. Okay, well, to close out the hour, I would like to. I think another good little vignette here is the tulip crisis.
Oh yeah, I always forget about that.
Yeah, this is an interesting kind of example of how these financial market things work. Like how these crazy financial panics and things like that work. So for those of you who don't know, the tulip crisis was a Dutch phenomena during the Dutch Golden Age. We had contract prices for tulip bulbs, which there were fashionable tulip bulbs varieties.
Were the Bitcoin of the day.
Right, basically, yeah. They rose to extraordinarily high levels and crashed dramatically in February 1637. There were basically all these different varieties of tulips that were being bred and stuff like that. And people were mortgaging like insanely high amounts of money here. I'm trying to find an equivalent.
No, it's the same thing that people started doing with Bitcoin when it got all crazy. It's like, I don't know, like trying to look at something as though it's a new source of money, but really you're just seeing it as an investment, always leads to these kinds of crashes. Mm-hmm.
So, okay, let's see. It looks like somebody bought 40 bulbs for what would be today's equivalent of about $1 million.
What's the lifetime on these fucking bulbs anyways?
I think the thing is that if, those are the 40 bulbs of the new hot strain, this new strain of tulip,
God,
you've got the only 40
it's
bulbs.
So much like Bitcoin for me. I just thinking about how many people were telling me about Bitcoin when they bought it, and I'm like, dude, stop. This is not a good investment.
Right. Well, anyways, I just thought that was an interesting interesting thing to end out the hour on. It seems like this is so normal, but I wouldn't be surprised if people look back on the 2008 financial crisis in a similar way to tulip mania.
Yeah, I mean that's just like what Bitcoin was. I mean, it's very similar to what people were like, oh, the housing market, it only goes up. You only ever make money. And I mean, I don't know why people thought that, because you could have simply looked at history and saw that wasn't true. But, I mean, it was just another one of those things where people were looking at these investments and for some reason seeing it as some new type of currency, but seeing it as like the line was only ever going to slope upwards. But that's what the thing is, like, you're not seeing the real thing is, like, it's not a new currency, it's an investment, and so, like, underlying that is the stability of the currency that you're investing in to begin with. So
you got the Dutch economist who's on the 1600s equivalent of Mad Money being like, our predictions have it that by the year 1900, one tulip will be worth $6 billion.
Here's the charts we projected for tulip bulbs.
Anyways, all right, so let's go to we're gonna go to a break and then come back and start talking about the Federal Reserve. All right, and welcome back to Thought Crime, where we are making a fortune on the margins. You can find us at soundcloud.com/ThoughtCrimeUSA, Twitter.com/ThoughtCrimeUSA. Get at me. Tweet at me, brah.
Okay, well, we can expect heavy usage of the Twitter handle there.
Mm-hmm. Face crime. That's the new one. Is face crime. After that poor little kid in D.C., he was committing face crime.
Man, the thing about that, right before we get back into the Federal Reserve, it's like, you do know, like, you just made, quote unquote Nazis out of like a whole class of children. Like, you can't just like demonize these kids for doing nothing and then expect that to like not change their worldview.
Right. The kids, you got these kids who are sitting through Holocaust class.
I mean, they're acting mature.
And they're like, look at the way
screaming in their face.
Right.
I don't know.
You got.
It's just like, I mean, I
got a high school kid
to it because I want more young white kids on the side. But it's like, how do you not see that that's what you're gonna do?
You got a high school kid who's sitting through Holocaust class, and they're like, look at this propaganda that the Nazis put out there. Look at how they demonized these innocent Jews. And then they see a kid who looks like them, who's smiling at this crazed PTSD-riddled, alcoholic Native American veteran banging a drum in his face. He's like, this is happening to me, man. Anyways, man.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel bad for people who haven't spent around a lot of time around natives because, dude, they're all fucking like addled brain types, and the least thing you want to do is just stand there. Okay.
They like their liquor,
Yeah. Then, anyways, let's move on. Okay, so the Federal Reserve. I guess so. Now we'll talk a little bit more about the history of the actual founding of it and the mechanisms before I guess we branch off to other things.
Right.
Okay, so I'm going to start with the Panic of 1907, which I briefly mentioned before. And so at that time, J.P. Morgan was really like, financing almost everything in the country. He was giving loans to, like the people in the steel industry and the oil industry and everything. He was just kind of running everything in the absence, of an actual central bank. He was kind of this central bank figure, just because he ran so much of this like money supply. And so
he had his hand in so many like cornerstone industries of the U.S.
Yeah, and I mean, even today, what's one of the biggest banks? It's still got his name on it. And so the Panic of 1907 happened because basically J.P. Morgan started spreading rumors that one of his competitor banks, which was called like the Knickerbocker Trust, that was like going under or didn't have reserves or something. So it caused a bank run on it.
They don't have the money to back it. The money's not in the bank.
So, there's a bank run, and then all those loans get called in, and then when all the loans get called in, people start losing their homes and all that stuff, which is, very characteristic of all those bank runs leading up to that time.
Well,
there was a number of them that happened from the time, basically, Jackson shuttered the doors of the second bank and the Federal Reserve, because that was about a 70-year period, and a lot of these kind of scares were cropping up, really pretty much just to, like, lead up to, getting a central bank back.
Well, it's, because basically the banking interests were not happy that there wasn't a central bank, and because there wasn't a central bank, they would do...
They always make a lot of money after these, because when all the loans get called in and everybody loses their stuff, you can buy all that crap for really, really cheap.
Right, you get the prices to drop when everyone freaks out. The prices drop and you buy back for pennies on the dollar.
They want more control, and you buy a lot of stuff for cheap. Okay.
It's like, oh, geez, what's the solution here? We clearly need a central bank.
So after the panic of in the
well, just real quick.
Oh, go ahead.
Just in case people don't understand what a bank run is.
Oh, is everyone going and saying, "Give me the gold that my notes are backed by"?
Yeah, and a bank doesn't have enough cash on hand to cover all of the people's loans.
Well, at that time it was the gold. Like, they were supposed to have
cover everyone's
deposits for it, and as you already said, I mean, fractional reserve banking has been a thing since banking's been a thing because it's just a natural extension of it.
Right.
And so, yeah, they never have the money to redeem everything at once. So, alas, you get these collapses. And so, when all this happened, again, very similar to what happened in 2008, there was a big investigation into it. And it was called, like, the investigation into the money trust. And basically, the results were that they found that 3 banks basically controlled all of the money in the country. And that was JP Morgan, Citibank, and then there was a third, I think it was like a New York bank or something like that. I don't remember what the third one was. But basically they were like, wow, look, there's like 3 people controlling all of the money. And so then this caused a public, opinion switch thing. Then they're saying, like, we need a central bank to control these people. Like, these people need regulation. Like, it's kind of like what you see with the net neutrality, right? Like, the people were like, hey,
right.
We need the control away from the corporations, without realizing that when you call for that and people are agreeing, it's because, well, the corporations got there first. And so then
someone's got to stop these big tech companies. Huh? Someone's got to stop these big tech companies. We need to regulate them. Meanwhile, they're going to pour, as much money as is needed into
and so that's basically what happened. And so also all the banks are also pro-central banking. And, it's that time, it's like whenever the elites are agreeing with you, that's how you know you're wrong. Is because if something's in their interest, it's never in your interest. And this is like one of those times. And so all the public wants something to regulate because they're tired of losing their savings every time a bank run happens. And so now all these banks are saying, like, yeah, let's have a central system. That sounds good. Like, regulate us, please, because they realize they'll.
So the big reason why the Panic of 1907, people were calling for a central bank after that, is because there was an independent treasury system which managed the nation's money supply, and it wasn't able to inject liquidity back into the market quickly enough. So that was what was causing these shortfalls, that they weren't able to actually make good on all those treasury notes quickly enough.
Yeah, and so then, as the infamous story, I guess, goes after that, it was in 1910 is when that whole Jekyll Island meeting that went on. And, let's see, who were the people there?
So we're going to talk a little bit about the creature from Jekyll Island, basically.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like at this point, it's like you should just refer to G. Edward Griffin.
Yeah, G. Edward Griffith, I believe. Is it Griffin?
Is it Griffin?
It's Griffith?
I don't know.
It's G. Edward Griffin. Okay, yeah. Sorry. He's an old school conspiracy theorist guy.
Oh, I mean, like, I feel like anybody who somehow has found this podcast has to know who he is.
There's a lot of people that don't know much about conspiracy stuff.
But this is hardly conspiracy because it's actually true.
Right. Well, anyways, he goes into a lot of the whole technocracy stuff as well. I'd recommend his work. I'd recommend people check out his work. So there's 2 things about the Jekyll Island meeting. It was 1913, an island off the coast of New York, I believe. No, 1910.
1913 is when it passed.
Mm-hmm. And there were representatives, or the owners, basically. It was Morgan. JP Morgan was there, right?
I think somebody from. I don't think Morgan was there, but I think it's somebody that worked for him was there.
It was basically high level representatives from all these 3.
Senator Aldrich guy. He's like he was the son-in-law to one of the Rockefellers. So.
Right, and they all went to Jekyll Island they used false names going there because they didn't want to be spotted. Or they just
used their first names. I don't know if they have false names, but
some of them used false names to avoid being spotted by the press, because it was all these major financial people all meeting up in secret to plan a central reserve bank.
Yeah, and this is another thing that about this time that's so different than today is that at that time, like, banking reform, monetary reform was this huge thing in the public eye. And so, like, bankers and stuff, people knew who they were. And, like, this was a thing that was very important to people. So, like, now, half the time, I don't think people even, like, people wouldn't be able to even know who Ben Bernanke is, So it's like...
Right.
But at this time, Ben Bernanke people knew who these people were.
Benjamin Bernanke and Joe Diamond can walk down the street freely without anyone knowing who they are. So
so this is during a time where, like, the public.
What a name for a scumbag! What a name for a scumbag banker, by the way. That was the CEO of Chase during the whole 2008 crash. His name is Joe Diamond. And it's Diamond. It's been further like cryptoed because it's Diamond with no D at the end. It's like Joey Diamond. In the words of Marcus Halberstram, you need to be careful with people who have last names that are named after precious metals and things like that. You know, you got a guy with the last name Goldberg, Platinumberg. So yeah, they basically in secret met to design a central bank. And do you want to get into the actual legislation that they wrote?
I mean, to be honest, I don't know much details about the legislation, besides the fact that I know at first it failed, and then they kind of reformed it a little bit, and then it passed in 1913.
Right, so there's when they first proposed the legislation, what they did was they had people in all the major newspapers put out articles, the banks themselves, I believe, put out a lot of articles that were saying, we are against the Federal Reserve Act because it will ruin our banks. Mm-hmm. And they said, this is going to limit our ability to do stuff. It's going to be terrible for the banks.
Like net neutrality.
Right, you can't pass this. But that didn't work. Mm-hmm. So there's two things I wanted to get back to just real quick before we get to that. Talking about net neutrality. These are the two big differences between now and back then. Is that back then, people knew who bankers were, and it would be front page news if a bunch of the world's biggest bankers were meeting together in secret. Okay, we're recording this. We're recording this either during or right after Davos. Mm-hmm. All right, so this is just totally commonplace today.
People just shut you down now.
It's like, what are you, crazy? Yeah. What, do you listen to Alex Jones?
Well, what I was saying was I was having beers with my coworkers, and I made some comment, and I was basically like, yeah, fuck the Federal Reserve. And they were literally like, what? It was just something that didn't register. And it was just like, what, you like a private company having control of all of your money?
So, of course, it's money. It's,
But God forbid a private company controls my Netflix account.
Yeah, no, that would be a affront to human rights. Okay. Okay, so yeah, the first kind of round of propaganda was making it seem like this bill would be terrible for the banks. The second step after that first iteration of the bill didn't pass through Congress, there was a second iteration of the bill, and what that did is it had a bunch of added oversight over the banks, and basically limited all their ability to.
It said, "Don't worry, we'll regulate ourselves more."
Well, no, that was the thing. Is it tied their hands and allowed them to not regulate the issuance of currency and basically not be in control of the national monetary supply, and when they did that, they were able to convince William Jennings Bryan to get on board with the Federal Reserve Act. And William Jennings Bryan came out of the previous economic crisis, which was the Panic of 1893, which was a similar thing. This is how all these panics work: is there was heavy investment in Argentina. Then there was a crop failure in Argentina, and basically everyone panicked, and there wasn't enough money to cover everyone's investments. Okay. It's the same way that things happen now with George Soros encouraging investment in Southeast Asia, and then when the property prices go way beyond what they're actually worth, and everything goes belly up, then there's a panic. Yeah. This is how these things always work. So William Jennings Bryan came out of that, and he was a populist radical, basically. He was part of the Free Silver movement, which is basically saying that talking about the importance of the gold standard and a carefully fixed money supply. He was, basically it was a populist movement, and I think he actually went to jail for. I think he was against World War I or something like that. But they were able to get him on board, and once they got him on board, that pretty much ended the opposition to the Federal Reserve Act, and they were able to pass it. So, yes. Then
Oh,
it
yeah,
was
yeah.
signed into
I
law.
didn't know that part about him. I didn't know the free silver thing. So he was just arguing for silver-backed money at some point?
Yeah, well, he was talking about, he was basically saw that this over-financialization of the economy was leading to all these crises, and that a fixed monetary supply that was hard currency was the solution. And I think there was a lot of farmers that were really into this because
because farmers were always subjected to speculation and just the loans they had if they'd made a bad year and they would just not be able to pay their loans. So it's always been a lot of the bank stuff has always hinged on the farmers. I mean, this is another subject, but even
leveraged,
today, the farmers are still controlled by the banks, and it's a really sad situation what's happened in the heartland of our country. But
yeah, the farmers get really leveraged, and then they get like we were saying again,
they get fucked over so bad.
Right, the bank either gets a good return on their investment, or there's a crisis, and then they get to foreclose on the farm.
Well, the banks have effectively controlled our entire food supply as well at this point, which is pretty tragic.
So once William Jennings Bryan signed on, then the Federal Reserve Act was able to pass.
Yeah, and so I mean, I guess too with the Federal Reserve, it was still the money was still gold backed for a while, right?
So the U.S. officially moved off of the gold currency with Nixon.
Yeah. So I don't know how long it was officially. I guess I don't know when they started doing the fractional stuff and got actually away from it, but
before that there was the notes were the paper currency notes all had to be transferable to gold. So if you brought in a note, you were able to get $1 in gold for a $1 note. But it wasn't necessarily that there was as many dollars worth of gold held in reserve. And then later I believe it was under FDR, people actually had to turn in their gold.
Yeah, there was a whole... Mm-hmm. And the only people that could keep their gold was if it was a numismatic coin, or if it was some special little trinket thing. You had to turn in all your gold if it wasn't that. Which I think that was the time that the Federal Reserve did hand over all their gold. Because I'm pretty sure that was when the Federal Reserve stopped owning any gold. It was in the 34, I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so that was the so it was technically a gold-backed currency.
But they just received those gold certificates.
Yeah. Right. And then after the Federal Reserve turned in their gold, the U.S. currency was still pegged at a price that was relative to gold after that, I believe. It was like a pseudo gold-backed currency kind of a thing. And then between that and when we were completely removed from the gold standard under Nixon, I believe it was the Bretton Woods Agreement, where all other currencies in the world were valued relative to the U.S. dollar. So the dollar was effectively the gold in that, quote unquote, in that scenario. Yeah,
which is the struggle we're still struggling against, or perhaps I should say other countries are struggling against. Cough, cough, Iran.
Cough, cough, Libya. Cough, cough, Syria.
Libya lost
cough,
that
North
fight,
Korea.
let's be honest there.
Right. So moving forward, what do you have next in your notes there?
Okay, so I was thinking then from there. Okay, well I guess to recap a little bit then would be that was all the stuff leading up to the Federal Reserve, and then we've talked a little bit about the different kind of problems that have then come out of that. And so, as we can see, pretty much we've just had, this banker monopoly in our entire country for all of modern history.
The insane runaway debt, all these other things.
All these things, they're just, natural phenomena that come out of, having private banks that then have a regulating agency that they run. And so, effectively, we have just allowed the entire, money / economy of our country to just, be run at whatever whim that the private banks have. So, it can't be surprising when these, big humps and roller coasters come along.
The 3 stated goals of the Federal Reserve was to
Wait, let me see
stabilize
if I can guess them. Control inflation.
But yeah, it was control inflation and stabilize the economy.
Do give out the money supply.
Yeah, I think though you can kind of wrap those.
Well, they are the same thing, but are they stated as two different goals or not?
I don't have it written down here.
Oh, okay, sorry. I thought
but it was basically along those lines of stabilize the economy, control the money supply, and decrease the influence of banks and lending institutions.
And they did the opposite.
Decrease their control over the economy.
No,
right.
That is true.
So,
it's just bringing me back to 16-year-old me when I started realizing all these things for the first time.
It's all a scam. And yeah, if you look at the number of economic crises that we've had in the last 100 years, if you look at the amount of inflation that's occurred over the last 100 years, and then if you look at the hyper-financialization that's occurred. Yep.
I was going to say, so related back to when the country was in its infancy stages before it was a country, when the colonies were just basically printing their money and going about business with their own printed monies in every colony. The money in Philadelphia was one of the best managed ones, probably just because it was a bunch of elites there, and so basically they just printed it to match demand, and that was that. And I guess I don't know for how long that money was there, but in the time span of the Philadelphia fiat currency, it was more stable than any currency in this country has ever been. So I don't just point in case there, with absolutely nothing regulating it besides the government saying this is demanding of me, so I print more and give it out. That was far better at stabilizing anything than having this complex regulating body. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that's all.
Right. So the basic concept of a central bank, which I guess we didn't really get into, but is basically the idea that it allows people to take out loans. They pay back those loans at interest. Then that money, and then the central bank prints money as needed to meet those loans, and periodically takes money back in to manage the supply and control inflation. Because if the amount of dollars keeps increasing, then their buying power decreases. So you basically want to keep a stable money supply and allow people to take out loans.
Excuses for when they raise the interest rate is they're saying we're controlling inflation.
Well, do you want to just describe real quick how that Philadelphia bank worked, that we can get clear with?
Literally just cut and dry. Was they printed their own money, and to meet the demands of the colony, they would just print more money.
Just as the
it was
the
state
mechanism?
Fiat currency, so it was just back.
What was the mechanism by which
of the state?
My question is, what was the mechanism by which that printed money was loaned out?
Oh, I guess I don't know what interest rate it was or anything like that.
That's what I'm saying. Is that's how you have to control them.
I don't know 100%, but I mean, I would imagine that it was also for state work. But yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly. They probably loaned out at some interest rate, but basically it was this autarky ran system where they just printed the money that was necessary for their society, and it worked just fine.
If the money was printed out based off of the demand for loans for the money.
Yeah, and nothing more. And that's the true way to control inflation. So the Federal Reserve says they control inflation because if inflation is going up, they increase the interest rate to get the money out of the system to try to cap it. But it just it's in your history.
Well, what they basically
worked.
do. Yeah, what they do instead of... So what we're kind of getting at here is that with the Philadelphia Bank, it was printing money based off of the demand for loans.
Yeah, they had the demand, and then they met it.
The way the Federal Reserve works now is they're saying, hey, we want the economy to move this way. We're going to print out all this money, figure out ways to loan it out.
Yeah, so I guess there's one that's a response to the economy and another one that is trying to control the economy.
Yeah, it's figure out a bunch of financial scams and financial instruments that you can get this money lent out to people. Okay, so the third stated goal of the Federal Reserve Act was to decentralize the control of the banks.
They just put that in there to fuck with you.
Right, and like decrease the.
That's just one of those things where like the elite love to like rub it in your face or whatever. That's what that is.
Mm-hmm. Pretty much. It's talking about decreasing the financialization of the economy, basically. And what I didn't know is that before the Federal Reserve Act, most companies, when they were doing research and development or expanding or whatever, they would use their savings to do the R&D projects and to do the expansion of their business. And that's like unthinkable today. You know, that you would be able to open a second location without taking a loan, that you would be able to develop a new product without taking out massive loans that need to be paid back, you know?
Yeah, it's highly respectable. and I wish that was
right.
The way it still
that's
went.
I mean, that's part of it's highly principled, low time preference, long time horizon method of running business.
It's saying like, you know, when I work hard and then I get myself to be able to afford this, like that's the way it always.
And it's part of what creates right. It's part of what creates this kind of bullshit situation where it's like, hey, you know, the business, it's fucking people over, but you know, the people running the business, they have a legal obligation to do what's best for their shareholders. And it's like, that isn't such a cut and dry thing of you have to be like super vicious and screw over your customers when you're not having to pay back a massive loan. Yeah. Like when you have a stable baseline, you don't have to necessarily fuck everybody over.
And this is what we're
all paid back.
And talk into, because there has been banking systems in the past that have put the, you know, normal citizen of the society above anybody else. And like and in my opinion, this is the way that central banking works, and that central banking is great. And this is what, when the public says they want central banking, this is actually what they want.
We're getting into Mike's monetary theory.
I mean, I guess I don't actually know what his monetary theory is, but there is like 3 specific examples I have that I want to talk about. That is just
let's save that for a minute here, because I don't think we've gone into how the central banking system actually works quite enough, and how fiat currency really works.
Can't buy me love, can't buy me love. I'll buy you a diamond ring, my friend, if that makes you feel alright. I'll get you anything, my friend, if it makes you feel alright. 'Cause I don't care too much for money, but money can buy me love. I'll give you all I've got to give if you say you love me too. I may not have a lot to give, but what I got I'll give to you. I don't care too much for money, but money can buy me love, can buy me love. Everybody tells me so, can buy me love. No, 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 say you don't need no diamond rings and I'll be satisfied. Tell me that you want the kind of things that money just can't buy. I don't care too much for money, money can buy me love. Just can't buy. I don't care too much for money, money can buy me love. Now buy me love, love, buy me love.
So, like we mentioned before, basically the way it works is the Fed prints out a bunch of money. Then they give it to the banks. The banks charge interest on it. Well, they give it to the banks at interest. Yeah.
It's not just that, though.
Okay.
Well, okay, wait. Are we talking about like central banking in general, or are we talking about the Federal Reserve?
Let's talk about the Federal Reserve specifically.
Okay, so the majority of the money they make is not that they're printing it out and giving it to banks. The majority of the money they make is because they allow banks to do the fractional reserve banking,
Right.
which then allows the banks to make money.
Right. So you've got the bank, you've got the Fed. The Fed prints out money, and then they give it to the bank. And then they're like, bank, you have to pay us this money back with interest. But then the bank themselves, for every $100 the Fed prints and gives to them, they can loan that out. They can loan out $900 based off of that one, because that's the fractional reserve.
They only need
banking
10%.
system.
The rule is right now we only need 10% reserve.
Right. So the 10% reserve, then they charge interest on all $900.
Mm-hmm.
So they're making 10 times.
They're making magical money.
Exactly, and that money was nothing to begin with.
Yeah.
Okay. So why is it that there's a middleman in there, basically? This sounds familiar. This system that like should normally work, that's like a just normal part of a functioning society, and then some sort of like middleman just starts getting in there, and he starts scheming on the margins. Can you hear that?
There's a like.
Can you hear that?
Stop! I don't like that song. For more reasons than one, but yeah, it's just one of those things that's like all through time we've had these like warnings that that's not good.
We've had
like
these problems.
not only is like usury just like banned in every religious text besides the Torah.
Yeah,
well, I guess it's banned for like-minded
certain people, yeah, certain
but,
like-minded interests.
At the same time, like you have the story of King Midas.
Mm-hmm.
You know, everything turns such to gold, and it's a curse. So it's like,
but like that's bad for in this context. That's bad for certain other people.
Get money out of nothing. It is cursed.
For certain other
money.
people, it's like it's wonderful. It's the best thing. Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
the
there's
story.
a reason why they are the cursed people.
Right. The story of King Midas from the Talmud is like he had this wonderful power. Everything he touched could turn into gold. But technically, he was wearing gloves, and he put on the golden gloves. Therefore, technically, everything he could still touch. Everything.
If he put up this wire around the city, like it
because
would be
technically
different.
This wire is an extension of the body, therefore, and he was able to out-negotiate the gods, and he was.
I
So, No, okay, but this is the big issue.
It's something that we've been warned. Like it only ends in disaster, and this is that thing that like you should heed.
Right, and I don't think people realize how much banks are making off of interest.
Mm-hmm.
I have a little simple interest calculator that's pulled up here. Margaret, say that you want to take out a loan. So this is just the.
Okay, here I come. I need a loan for a house.
Okay, mortgage. All right, a mortgage for the house. How much is the house going to cost you?
Let's say I'm a reasonable person. It's my first time home buying, so $250,000.
$250,000.
Okay, but I'll actually put down 20% because I'm gonna like live by the standards that I was taught.
Okay, so you're putting down 20%, which would be so that's $200,000.
No, it is not.
What? You put down 20% of $250,000, so it's $200,000.
No, 20% of $250,000 is not $200,000.
No, but that's the remaining outstanding loan is 80%.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant that.
All right, well, and how long would you like your mortgage to last?
30 years.
A 30-year mortgage, $200,000. All right, well, so just for starters, let's think about this.
Okay, so put the 15 because what I would do, I would take the 30-year mortgage, but I would be paying far in excess of my payments every month. So what's just 15 years? What would be the interest rate?
You'd be paying double payments?
Well, no, okay, so the smart thing to do is to take the 30-year mortgage and then just pay as much as you can every month so that in the case that you have a bad month, you can pay less if you need to.
I'm trying to do a simple.
Okay, 15 years. 15 years.
No, we're doing a 25-year mortgage. Nobody does a 15.
It's 15 or 30. That's the classic. Just do 15.
All right. I'm trying to make a point here. Most people get 30-year mortgages. We're going to go with a 30-year mortgage.
Okay.
Okay. With today's interest rates, you're putting down $50,000. Now let's just.
I think the average interest rate today is like 4%.
Now let's just think about this real quick. I'm lending you $200,000.
That you don't even have.
Well, because you're giving me a down payment of $50,000 for my $200,000 loan. But the funny thing about this whole deal is that I only have $20,000 on hand of that money I'm lending you. So like, all right, thank you for the $30,000. So now on top of that, by the time you get done with your 30-year mortgage, you will have paid me $340,000. So you paid $140,000 in interest on that mortgage.
Yep.
So, just think about that. All off of $20,000. Pretty good deal if you ask me.
Yep.
So that's really the insane part, when the people don't realize how much money they're paying just in interest.
Yep. I mean, as we were saying, it's low time preference versus high time preference.
Well, at this point too, it's not like you'd have to work your whole life and then some. No.
I'm not saying save up to buy the entire house.
Right.
Like, some people do that, and that's like mad respect if you do that.
Mm-hmm.
I've actually known people who've done that, but what I'm just trying to it's just like. Today, like the average, I actually was reading that last year the average down payment was like 5%, 5 or 6%.
Right.
And so, like, what I'm saying, like, you should probably at least save to be able to at least do the 10%.
Now let's think about this real quick. Just if you paid, instead of paying 20% down, if you paid 10% down, you would end up spending maybe $382,000 at the end of that mortgage. So that's an extra $40,000 that you would have been paying. It's ridiculous how much.
There's a reason why usury is a sin.
Yeah, and it's all off of I only have to hold $20,000 in reserves. Like, what is that? That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the basic deal. That's
the fractional reserve bank.
Right. That's how our system works.
Yeah.
And I guess the idea behind that is that it expands the economy quicker because you have more liquidity in the market. You can lend out more money, easier.
I actually don't know what the justification behind fractional reserve banking is, nor do I think any explanation would be honest anyways. So,
you see, technically, we're giving more people more money.
The thing is like, with fractional reserve banking is like, it's just this natural extension of allowing people to be bankers. The minute you have people making deposits into a institution and then people making loans off those deposits, like, you just lead into people making more loans and deposits.
Yeah. And
like,
okay,
it's
so this
just
is
the way that leads. So fractional reserve banking doesn't surprise me that's a thing, but any trying to rationalize decision, or to try to tell me why it's okay to do it, like, I'm not going to accept that, besides the fact that, like, it's just you making money.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's the real reason.
Let's just go over this one more time, because I remember this was something that always was confusing for me. Like, I would hear the concept of fractional reserve banking, how it works, and I'd be like, oh yeah, I get that, that's a scam, and then I would forget it afterwards. So for the audience, one more time. No, there's different levels of lending and stuff, and you kind of forget the details. So for the audience, again, one more time. The Fed, they print the money. It's just paper. They print it. They lend it to the banks.
They don't always have to print it. It can be.
Oh yeah, nowadays it's like 99% digital.
Yeah.
They lend it to the banks at interest. So now the bank has to pay them back plus interest. But then the bank can lend out 10 times as much money and charge interest on that.
It is taxation without representation to the core.
Oh, basically that's a good point. That's a good point. So yeah, that's a total scam.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is every time you're paying interest on anything, you're paying a tax that was never voted for.
And that, my problem isn't necessarily the concept of lending at interest, but it's the concept that you're lending at interest for money you don't have. Like, you never had the money to begin with. That's the problem.
That goes into this other, like, my idea of the system that should be.
Okay, so now let's get back into kind of like a just central bank model.
Yeah, okay, so I know there's many schools of thought that say that, like, usury is completely bad, like, no interest rate should be charged, especially if you're Muslim, for instance. Like, if you're an actual Muslim, like you cannot charge interest on anything and be an honest Muslim, right?
But you can have a Hebrew gentleman that works as your financial advisor who can then lend to interest to other people, and then that's okay.
Okay.
Because you didn't do it.
I'm just trying to make a point here. Was that, in, like, many ways, we can look at, like, the, like, interest in the debt slavery as just, like, completely unjust. And in many ways, I agree. But I do think there are ways that if you have controlled, extremely low interest rates, that can serve as your taxation. Like, if central banking is operated as owned by the state, if they give out loans that are at, like, 1% interest, that's extremely low. People would not be rioting about that interest rate. People would be fine to pay it. And this way you have state income, from a very low interest rate that allows people to have the loans they need to, start their businesses, do their farms or whatever. And at the same time, you're actually getting state income from that, and you're able to put it back into your society. And so,
right, that's a really good point, because interest is effectively a tax, and it 100%
is.
Well, if you use interest,
because right now we're living in, when the Federal Reserve put over whatever interest rate, the only people paying it is us. Like, we are the ones that are paying it. So we're paying a higher interest rate to our private banks, but what that is doing is paying off that rate. So it is just a tax.
Well, but then on top of that, taxes, if you use the interest rate as a method of raising revenue for the government, it makes taxes unnecessary.
Exactly.
Because as it is right now,
because you should not your
income tax
point where, like, nobody should be taxed as a penalty for something you should be doing. So, like, if you're taxed on a loan, I actually think that's okay.
Yeah,
that makes sense. But when you're taxed for doing your job and adding to the economy, that makes no sense. So, like, an income tax to me actually makes no sense.
The income or the interest
in a different country or taking out a loan, that sounds like a good tax to me.
The interest is required because it's the incentive that is required for someone to want to lend out to begin with, and it's the disincentive from taking out excessive loans. Mm-hmm. So there is an element to that does make sense. But when you pay your taxes, your tax money isn't directly going to fund the government. Your tax money is going to pay off the interest on Federal Reserve notes themselves, which are just fake money. Mm-hmm. And the IRS is actually just basically the collections arm of the Federal Reserve. And again, the Federal Reserve is not actually a government institution.
It is not federal, and there are no reserves.
The next time, tax season's coming up, the next time you get your tax forms in the mail, take a look on there. Let me know if you can find anywhere on there where it says federal government document. Yeah. You get a parking ticket in the mail. You get a court summons. You get whatever you get. Your jury duty summons. It always says state document, federal document. This is a government document. Mm-hmm. One day I looked all over my tax. Nowhere it says this is an important tax document. This is an important federal tax document. That's all it says. Yep. So it's totally a scam of massive proportions to which people.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's not just a scam. It is slavery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's just modern slavery. It's hidden modern slavery, and that's all it is. And
it's the big lie. Big lie theory.
The what?
Big lie theory confirmed,
Yep. Like, yeah, and that's the thing about the Federal Reserve. Like, that's the shameless thing about it, is that none of this is a secret. They've never hidden the way they operate. people have just, I guess, decided it's boring and they don't care and that it works fine.
It's hidden through so many
apparently
layers.
You're fine, paying all these fucking taxes on your income. Like, you bust your ass, every day at work. And for some reason, you're giving, fucking 30% of your income at the end of all of it into these taxes. That, as a self-respecting white person, what do you even get from, I just think about it. I don't, there's no government service besides, I guess, the roads.
Yeah, right. What government services do you actually use? Yeah.
Yeah. In the absence, when you're not, a piece of degenerate shit, so you're not getting, anything from the welfare state, you're not using Medicare, you're not doing any of this stuff. What do you use besides the roads?
Yeah. The roads, the police, the military, the hospital, except you're going to get fucking raped on your Obamacare charges.
Well, but I don't even use the hospital.
Well, but if you break your leg or something.
Yeah, but it's just you're paying all of this exorbitant stuff.
It's honestly surprising.
We're adding to your economy.
So let's think about this. You're taking out a loan. You're taking out your $200,000 loan. You're paying $140,000.
And you're already paying taxes on any time you take out a loan. You're paying those taxes.
Right.
In addition.
So you're trying to get your family started. You're taking out $200,000 in loans. You're paying about $140,000 in interest. You are getting taxed at 30-40% on your income. You're trying to put your kid through college. It's another $50,000. You probably end up paying $20,000.
And then you're going to pay property tax as well.
You're paying property tax.
While
the
bank owns your land and you're paying the loan, you're still paying a property tax.
Right. And if you get into a car crash and you break your arm, that's going to be $15,000 in medical bills on top of it. In a theoretically, government subsidized healthcare system that we have. Mm-hmm. It's shocking that people are able to withstand this kind of oppression, and the reason why is because it happens. It's marginal.
We're domesticated little chihuahuas. They took us and the chihuahuas of the humans.
If the day after the Federal Reserve Act was passed, people suddenly had to get their income taxed at 20-30%, and they had to pay just pay out the nose the way they do now, the society would collapse overnight. But it's marginally the little totalitarian tiptoe. You lose a little bit of freedom. You don't notice it. No single step along the way is enough to really make you realize what's going on. But then here we are 100 years later.
1,000 switches.
Yeah, 100 years later, and it's ridiculous. And, because people become more and more productive as technology progresses, your quality of living, you're like, my quality of living's kind of, about the same. But you're not realizing
they convince you that your quality of living is fine because they convince you to finance a bunch of shit that you can't afford.
Right, but they're also you don't realize how much better your quality of living could be because 45-65% of your overall productive value that you're putting into the economy is being siphoned away to the system, man. That's the thing that people don't realize is it's our quality of living isn't incredibly better than it was for people in the 1920s or 30s, and it's because all that extra productivity that people are adding to the economy today is just all getting shunted into military-industrial complex, tribal nepotism, if you will.
We work more now.
Welfare state,
As the years progress, people work more and more. As technology has progressed, we have worked more alongside it. We
work more.
People were putting forth these ideas 30 years ago that as technology progressed, we would only have 10-hour work weeks.
8-hour work week, yeah.
Yeah, but it's no, all we've ever had is an increase in everything.
We are more productive.
More and more slaves to everything because not only do we have to fucking work more, but we have to pay more every year just to live in this country. Americans,
I believe, are the most productive workers in the world.
Yeah.
Yet we work more hours in a year than a medieval serf.
Man, the average white man, which is kind of the average kind of American worker, it's something 47 hours a week or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's insane.
Yeah.
That's your whole life.
Half of your waking hours, 6 days a week, is the average that people are working. And
that's just so unnatural.
Yeah,
like not only are you a wage slave to your employer, but whatever wages you're making, so much of that is going to, fund these bullshit systems.
See, that's the whole thing, is that a big thing that the communists would say is that, like, you're a worker and you produce every year for your boss, you produce $250,000 worth of value to the company, but you're only getting paid $35,000 a year. That doesn't seem right. And it's like, yeah, okay, but like you don't have necessarily the skills to organize the company and raise the capital to build all the machines and all the products and all the other stuff and blah, blah, blah. But it's like, once you realize that this guy is producing $250,000, making $35,000 a year, he's getting taxed for, 10% of that. And then on top of that, like everything else he's paying, he's got state and local taxes, really only taking home about, $15,000 a year.
Yep.
The amount of that's going then to his expenses, it's like you're getting paid like $5,000 a year, maybe you can put in the bank. Like, it's ridiculous.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean the plight of the small business owner is also something that a lot of people in this country don't understand until they actually know someone running a small business. Mm-hmm. Is that, like, as hard as it is to just be a regular employee, is like it's infinitely harder to try to start your own small business because of all that stuff.
And getting back to taxes again. A lot of small business owners.
It's all fucking taxes, insurance you have to get for every fucking person that, like, you're providing jobs, yet you're being gutted out for, like, the insurance and everything.
Right, you have to have all the insurance reported, yeah. And a lot of small business owners, on paper, it looks like their profits look like it's, in the couple $1 million, when really they might only be taking home, like, $100,000, but they got to pay taxes on, like, way more than they're actually taking home. Mm-hmm. So, when we're getting back to taxes, it's like, that's the whole deal. That is what is whack.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like
this is whack.
Like basic bitch libertarian when I'm going on about taxes, but it's like, it's actually true. Like, we are living in a, like, serf. We are basically serfs when we live in this system, and you're given this illusion of freedom and choice, but ultimately you are constantly forced to give away, a certain amount of your labor to these people that are providing you nothing.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, yes, we are, like, I guess when I say wage slave, maybe I should say wage serf. Maybe that's more accurate. But it's like, I don't know, like it's still, like, this valid point to be made. And
for me, when kind of going through the red pilling process, if you will, and coming back around the other side, I found it very valuable to look back at a lot of these kind of old school paleocon, libertarian conspiracy theory types, and you see it all from a very different perspective that makes it much clearer as to what's been going on here, and kind of understanding the whole political process as a whole. Like, you see how we got down to where we are now. And it just paints it in a much clearer picture. I think that a lot of those kind of 1980s, 1990s style conspiracy guys were saying a lot of things that are true now more than ever. And I guess what gives me hope is that back then they could only distribute their message through, like, videotapes, newsletters, things like that. Like, you'll see some of these old videos that are on YouTube now, and at the end it's like, thank you for being a member of the Truth Liberty Media Network. You can feel free to copy this VHS tape and distribute it to as many of your friends as you would like.
Yeah. No, that's what I was talking with my mom a little bit earlier today about that. For all of the insane bullshit of everything, it's like, I feel very grateful to live in this time that, like, I may actually able to, like, not just access information, but, like, access history. Mm-hmm. It's like I have a deeper understanding of history than, like, either of my parents do. Basically just because I've been able to, like, grow up in this world where I've, like, been completely encircled in it all. And, like, and I don't know, like, I'm at this point, I'm completely used to, like, oh, wow, this is completely new information that changes my worldview. And it's like, at this point, it's like, I just constantly welcome that stream. Like, nothing about that is weird or alarming. Like, I feel confident in my worldview, but I also accept every time I get new information that I'm perfectly comfortable changing it because I've changed it so many times at this point that it's just something that like the previous generation I guess was very uncomfortable doing because they just haven't been able to. But yeah, so I mean, I guess that's the refreshing thing.
Yeah, and I think that really that's part of what's important to having a wide vocabulary and lexicon with a lot of these things, and where the pitfalls of saying it's the Jews about everything, like simplifying it down to that, really becomes a problem because it's like this is a multifaceted thing. When you look at the big players of the Federal Reserve Act, actually the majority of them were not Jewish.
Yeah.
If you look at the financial institutions today, that's a different story. But this is.
Doesn't say the Rockefellers. They ain't Jewish.
Right. There's tendencies for certain types of people to.
I'm sure they may be Judeo-Christians.
That's a new derogatory term for the people who are they're not of the tribe, but they do a lot of the same type of things. Judeo-Christian. Sean Hannity is a Judeo-Christian. Okay. But it's kind of understanding that that's a part of the picture, and this is all it all just kind of makes it come the puzzle pieces start to come together in interesting ways. But getting back to kind of solutions and better ways for this system to operate, do you want to get into that?
Okay, so specifically within the United States. So currently there is one state bank, and that is a state bank in North Dakota. And so this state bank in North Dakota, it operates in the way that the state has to deposit all of their revenues in this one bank. And this bank also offers just like regular banking services to the community of North Dakota. And it's things like loans at 1% and 2% interest, which is far lower than, most regular banks. And all of the interest. So it's basically what I was saying before is all the interest that this bank gets is basically state revenue, and they use it like taxes, and they, put it back into their state. And North Dakota pretty famously has the lowest unemployment rate during the 2008 crisis. They were hardly affected at all. And they had a really big buffer to what was going on with the rest of the U.S. economy. And I think a lot of it really does come down to the fact that they do have this state bank that does take care of their people and, really fosters industry and small businesses by being connected to it. And also by, having this ability to make revenue without taxing their people.
Yeah, it's using that model of using the interest as tax revenue.
Yeah. And so for me, probably the most immediate way that we could try to disrupt the Federal Reserve System in a way, because obviously state banking, you're still using Federal Reserve notes, so it's not going to get rid of this problem of the national dependency upon this bank, but it can give you relief on a state level and give you security on a state level, because the Bank of North Dakota, it's not federally insured. It's basically backed by the confidence of the state itself, and that has turned out to be greater than the confidence in the national currency, or not the national, but the national system, because the Federal Reserve fucking crashed the economy.
Well, yeah, it's when you get that large system, like we were saying at the beginning of the show, that large system is unstable, or when it's unstable in a way that you can't control, and it fucks up everybody, not just your local area.
Kind of that concept of what is money? It's this elusive question that I can't answer. But in the essence, money is confidence in whatever system that you're using. And so if in your state you have this bank that you trust and that is constantly investing within your own infrastructure, there's just a higher level of confidence in that bank itself, and it's not going to crash as easily as something that's like far removed, And so it has seemed to work out extremely well for North Dakota, and it is something that I think more of us should try to push for in our states as a kind of smaller, shorter term solution to kind of growing your own community and letting your state be a little bit more independent.
Yeah, and I think one thing to point out here as well is that the concept of a central bank that is issuing currency is actually a good concept, because a lot of the this is kind of it almost seems like this is a necessary struggle that our society had to go through, because the concept of backing your currency with gold or something like that,
it limits you.
It limits you because your overall economic growth is linked to the supply of this arbitrary commodity of gold. It's not actually linked to how the whole economy is doing. It's just the amount of gold that's in circulation.
Okay. Yeah. Let me read you a quote. Okay. As you probably expected, is an Adolf Hitler quote. But it's, I next argued that the gold standard, the fixing of rates of exchange, and so forth were shibboleths which I had never regarded and never would regard as weighty and immutable principles of economy. Money to me was simply a token of exchange for work done, and its value depended absolutely on the value of the work accomplished. Where money did not represent services rendered, I insisted it had no value at all.
There we go.
Yeah. Taking down
the shibboleth.
Like I feel like the small brain take on the solution to the fractional reserve banking is to be
gold standard, audit the Fed.
Yeah. It's this. I mean, I fucking love Ron Paul, and I always will, and I'll go to the mat for him because he's like the best quality politician there ever was. But it's like, this is the smallest brain take about it, because what you're trying to say is you could never have confidence in your state. You're saying that there's no confidence, so we have to have confidence by backing it with some metal.
Just you don't have confidence in gold, or you'd have to have why does that have to be?
Yeah, you're saying that you have to have some type of other thing in order to have confidence in your country or state. When instead it's have confidence in your country.
Shiny metal. Well, it also creates a lot of problems too. People have the whole petrodollar theory, which is kind of valid in some ways, but
it's totally valid. It's totally valid. I mean, Gaddafi.
Yeah, well, I guess at the end of the day, that is a big part of what the confidence in the dollar comes from. Is the
well, we have fundamentally backed it with the power. We fundamentally backed it with the power of our state, in which the power of our state really is comes from, in this day, is oil.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
but similarly, it's kind of like when you have a currency that is backed by some sort of specific commodity, it then opens the door for the oil, the petrodollar, for these resource wars to back up the price of the currency.
I mean, or it's the freaking Hitler quote of just you can't force some resource to meet your demands. If you have a finite source, if you have a finite resources, the minute the demands of your economy ask for more, you can't give it.
Yeah, you have to.
And so it's I mean, that's the way. So I guess now if we transition to thinking about the Reichsbank under Nazi Germany, it's what they did when they nationalized that bank was they just did, print the money that's necessary for the demand of the economy.
Well,
and
so
you're never artificially restricted. Yeah, exactly. It's just like the colonial script.
The loans are based on the demand for loans, not the
and they're backed by the
confidence.
Money. Yeah, and they're just backed by the confidence of your state.
Right, and there's no fractional reserve lending.
No, there's nothing, and it doesn't need to be backed by something hard. When what you're saying is I have the confidence that the state is backing this, saying the state is saying this has value. So when I'm in the state, it has value.
So if I try to buy anything within this state with this money,
yeah,
I can
the
do
state
it with
says
this money.
I can
That's
do it.
yeah, that's basically
Yeah.
setting that set of rules.
And that's the thing is that works beautifully, and it has worked the best way. And it's just like it's been this weird brainwashing thing that we've been convinced that bank runs will happen, so we need something backing it.
And it also that's the big thing too, is that the run on the bank, if you have an actual central bank that's not a middleman for the Federal Reserve like we have now, there can't be a run on the bank.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because they will be like, oh, you want all your money in cash? We'll print you out some cash, and then there's your cash.
Well, there's no such thing as a run on the bank when what you're the only runs happened when what you're holding was like a proxy for something else.
Yeah, when
what you're holding is just the money itself. Well, there's no risk.
Right, and that's the thing too, is that with a gold-backed currency, you still have that problem. Because there can be that level of obfuscation.
That's why any backed currency is like the small brain take.
Right.
Because it can work. If you have like a ton of reserves, like it can work.
But then what? Then you just have, you know, trillions of dollars of gold hold up somewhere for no reason other than if somebody wanted to exchange. At which point you just might as well have gold coins.
Exactly.
You know.
Well, but like at this point, it shows that like when you have actually enough reserves to represent the notes you gave out, it just shows that you don't need those reserves at all. Mm-hmm. Because it's like when everybody has confidence in the system runs fine. Mm-hmm. And so you can give confidence without the reserve by just saying like, in my state, this is the money that we accept, and I will state and force that everyone has to accept it.
Right.
Well, you have confidence, and you don't need anything backing it. And you now are allowed to give and take as much as the demand requires.
Mm-hmm. And by lending out money as the demand for loan, like as a response for the demand for loans, it prevents a lot of these kind of like shady lending practices and these irresponsible borrowing practices. Mm-hmm. Because why did these banks go bankrupt basically in 2008? Mm-hmm. Was because they were lending more money than they're actually, like, they were the ones who were taking out the big loans to lend out to more people. Like, it's kind of like the Bitcoin economy, basically. The way Bitcoin works, which is the way Bitcoin has value, is the fact that it all has to add up on a balance sheet. Mm-hmm. Is basically it's all a giant encrypted balance sheet, and it simultaneously has to be solved.
Bitcoin is the Bugman version of the gold reserves, because they're like, whatever, there's only 2,100 Bitcoins or whatever is the fixed amount.
Right, and then it increases with value as it's limited. Yep. But yeah, Bitcoin is basically the cryptography.
It's not a money. It is not a money. It's just an investment.
That's the whole thing, is the only real value to the Bitcoin is the fact that the books have to add up. Every transaction, all of the books have to add up. Mm-hmm. And then there's cryptography on top of it so that it's like a cool Bugman thing.
Yeah.
But like that's really the only value, is just that nobody's scamming you and doing the middleman coin clipping, you know, in between the bank and you.
Yeah, but it's just like it's just like missing the essence of what money really is. And I mean, you know, I'm one to talk, and this is this question that people have constantly asked in societies, and maybe no one's ever gotten this answer. But I'm pretty sure all money is just something that's assured to you in the place that you are at today, something that you have in your hands for an exchange of doing something that you are confident in, that this is a universal exchange system.
Oh yeah, I mean, money has been, you know, shiny stones, it's been seashells, it's been pieces of paper, it's been gold.
Or just bartering services.
Yeah, it's been you're right. It's been chickens and goats and stuff.
And it's just like all money is the confidence that like what you're getting is actually worth what you're giving. Like, you know, like you're exchanging something that's worthwhile. And so
that's just
you don't need fucking a fixed amount of anything. You don't need gold. You don't need silver. You don't need fucking fixed Bitcoins. Like, all you need is the confidence that when push came to shove, you know, like your state would back you up saying like, you're right. You deserve this amount.
Your services could be You like this amount of work is worth this amount of paper.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's the funny thing too.
That's why I think fiat currency and central banking is actually good things.
Right.
It just has to be operated in a good state.
Well, this is what's so insanely infuriating about the whole Federal Reserve System is that this fractional reserve lending is like, it's not only that there's a middleman in between the issuer of the currency and the user of the currency. It's not just that there's that like that coin clipping happening there where they're taking a little bit off the margins.
Yeah.
It's that they're making 10 times. They're doing that 10 times over.
Yeah.
So it's not like they're just shaving off the edge of the coin. It's like they're shaving off 90% of the coin.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And that's the thing is that kind of stuff is also what erodes the confidence in the system.
Right. That's why people are so amped up about gold and Bitcoin.
Exactly. Is because when they realize the money they have is also the same money that's being magically appeared out of nowhere, is they start questioning, what the fuck am I holding? Mm-hmm. And so they look for something else to hold.
Right.
And so
the funny thing is that I'm imagining if so if we had this like just central reserve fiat currency system and people had money that maintained its value because it wasn't, because it was being lent out properly, and then say shit hits the fan and there's an EMP from the sun and the system goes down, and people have their fantasies about end of civilization and they're bartering with gold and stuff like that. It's like in that scenario, if there was good fiat currency, people would just still use the money. It would be just the same as the gold.
I mean, that's the way that I envision it, because I've thought about that too. Is that if you have this proper fiat currency, that basically what you would need would be a proper head of state that has the citizens' good fortune in mind. And so you are operating it in this way that you're only putting out money when the demand requires and everything. Okay, so you have this money that has a good faith backing. If something happened that people lost confidence in it somehow, that's what I asked myself. Is like, what would happen? Right. Well, if people lost confidence in that kind of money, I feel like what they would have to end up going to is a barter system.
Yeah.
Which is not bad. Like that's not a bad turn of fate. That's far better than some type of system where there's a bank run and everybody loses their money and then all of a sudden everybody's fucking homeless.
Right, and it's the
I even think the safeguard for it failing is probably better than the safeguard for the current system failing.
Yes. So I want to do a little fact check false real quick. I said that $4 trillion was the U.S. GDP for a year. It's actually about $11.5 trillion. So,
and you guys never would know.
Yeah, well, so it was about a third of all the money made in the U.S. in a year was given to the banks all in one fell swoop.
Oh, it's still shameful.
And I hear it's about $10 trillion right now that's floating around and still in unbacked loans that cannot be repaid. So we'll see how this plays out. The other thing,
man, every time I hear about this shit, I'm like, why the fuck am I such a good citizen?
This is another piece of a little bit of dubious anecdote that I've heard.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding is that around the build up to World War II, there was there were banks that lent out large amounts of money to the Soviet Union, and there was a large lending. Wait. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I just said something about the state bank of Russia.
Yeah. Well, so a lot of the Soviet Union was basically backed by Wall Street. We know that. But what I've heard,
but the fucking fact that the fucking Tsar Alexander II, I think, he did all these fucking programs, and he basically nationalized the bank, and then gave out all this money, and they opened tons of schools, and he banned serfdom and banned child labor, and did all these crazy things, and the Bolshevik Revolution killed him.
The Bolshevik Revolution.
Yeah, they were pretty much the most progressive worker society at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then this quote unquote workers' party,
Right.
fucking killed him and set that country back hundreds of years.
Right, which was actually a literal
Yeah.
literal blood sacrifice. To
And
Moloch
the
they
State Bank
did
of
with his
Russia was
family.
pretty amazing. Like they also like took a lot of the land after he banned the serfdom. They took a lot of the land and like gave it to all the people.
Well, then
And
they
so-
moved it. So then they moved in and got in bed with Wall Street because a lot of the early Soviet Union wasn't even necessarily like communist the same way we think about it. They were trading heavily with capitalism, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So that wouldn't surprise me because what I've heard is that pretty much the 1920s, 30s build up to World War II was you had global elites.
Wait. World War II or World War One?
World War II.
Okay.
So World War One, you kind of had. Okay, so
World
look to
War
World
One
War
was
II.
about Russia. World War II was about Germany.
right. Oh, interesting. You say that because the build up to World War II was kind of like playing out these different concepts of how to run a society for the modern era,
Mm-hmm.
and you had the Soviet Union and the U.S. that were already pretty much in the pocket of the big banks.
Mm-hmm.
They had their neo serfdom system where they were paying their tariffs, their what do you call it, their dole. What's the thing you pay to the king? It's like the fief or some shit. I don't know. Anyways, they were paying that. They're paying their tribute to the global banking empire, and then they were trying out communism and capitalism and fascism. And what I've heard is that as the part of the payback for World War One and the hyperinflation in Germany, basically there was Rothschild-owned banks that were set up in the U.S. and the Soviet Union, and that Germany essentially had a Rothschild bank, and what they did was they
Hitler
basically
ousted the guy.
Yeah, and then they set up their own national bank system.
Yeah, and then it was the Deutsche Reichsbank or whatever, the People's Bank instead.
Right, and then they were actually doing, and it's like, why did Germany have such an insane boom economy in the 1930s that everyone was gangbusters on and thought it was awesome and thought it was the best thing?
Yeah, I mean, like, dude, this bitch was giving out like you'd get married, and the fucking government give you $50,000.
Yeah, because they know
and then every time you had a kid,
well, now think about this too.
A quarter of it. You have 4 kids, your loan's gone.
Yeah, right. Let's think about this a little bit. Like when you're looking at when your economy becomes not about an arbitrary interest rate and a loan amount and all this other stuff.
It's about the growth of your people.
And it becomes, and you're actually looking at it as not being backed by gold or by oil.
No, but
it's
your
like
people.
Right. What's the value of the currency based on is the value of the society. So if you have a kid, and if the government gives you $50,000 to raise that kid properly, that kid is going to be more productive for the future society. And if you have a kid that's raised really well, they're going to produce far in excess of $50,000.
It's gonna give me all those sad feels about the Nazis.
Hey, don't be sad. Don't be sad that it's over. Just be happy that it existed.
I know, but it's just one of those things that like this, like, yeah. I mean, the National Socialist Workers' Party of Germany was totally the system of the future. Like that's what the modern society should have been based off of. But it was just cut short. And it's just very sad to always have to revisit that.
Yeah, it's pretty.
It was so futuristic.
In a lot of ways, yes. Like, and for that era, which is why some of this like Nazi LARPer stuff is stupid, in the sense that like the aesthetic aspect of it, because those people were forward looking, they weren't backward looking.
No, and that's the thing is like. And it is a movement that cropped up in a historical time that is not anymore and everything. But it's just like the like Volks thing, like the movement of like being for the people and stuff is like just sadly it's like so rare to actually have seen cropped up in modern history.
Mm-hmm.
That the fact that it did crop up in this place that it was felt so strongly is like. I don't know. It's just like one of those things that it's always one of those.
No,
things
yeah,
pull your heartstrings.
It's a horrible tragedy, and looking. looking back at some of that stuff and hearing from the people who were there, it'll bring you to tears, like seeing how badly that country was destroyed and how much vitriol and bile still exists for this episode in history that they won't let you forget,
and
no matter what.
Truly down to the core, all it really was a country attempting to take hold of its own economy.
Yeah, and now, not even if you just support those people, but if you come from the same hemisphere, you will never be forgiven for ever having the goal to stand up against the system.
Right, that was like some meme I saw of, like, basically it was like the Germans, and they're like, you know, giving their entire country to the refugees, and still I'm like,
not good
US,
enough.
It's like, oh, you're just German Nazis, and it's like, you know, I just wish people realize, like, no matter what you do, like, won't erase the slander that has been done to your kind, and that you should just accept it and, like, be the best.
You know, I think that things are really moving in a very interesting direction and at a very quick pace. The other day, I know I just called him a Judeo-Christian, but the other day on his program, Sean Hannity used the word anti-white as a derogatory term for that Native American guy banging the drum.
Oh, jeez.
I mean, but like that's something, you know, if you heard that 4 years ago, you'd be like, whoa, you know? So, it just kind of shows. What?
I was just thinking about what 4 years ago was. That was 2015.
Obama was president for an entire other year.
Man, you know what sucked? Was Obama's second term.
Yeah, dude.
Dude, like everything in that time period was just like
all the policies got like
pill.
All the policies just got like so fake and.
Well,
gay.
yeah, it was like this fucking black faggot just finally realized like he doesn't have to like put on a face for anything.
Right.
So it was just black pill after black pill.
Again, in the words of Marcus Halberstram, you got fucking Barack Obama up there for 8 years with his fucking brown face preaching to America.
No, and that's the thing is like I feel like at least fortunate that through the Obama administration, I was like, for the first half, I was like young and not paying attention to anything. And then for the second half, I was like beginning to pay attention, but like, it was like, oh, the world sucks, like just like I thought it did.
Yeah, you didn't have to.
Because it was like, you know, like I remember when I was like 14 or 15 years old, I read Economic of a Hitman or whatever.
Yeah.
And so it was like, from the time I can remember, I had this view of like everything just being like black pilled. And so it's like during the second administration of the Obama term, when I like was like more cognizant, it was like, you know, like, wow, yeah, that's true. Like everything is horrible and that is that. And sometimes I feel grateful for that because like it's kind of like only been up from there. In this short time period,
yeah,
but like I can't imagine being
politically
like
invested.
If I was like 20 years older and having to have lived through the Obama presidency, like that seems like torture.
Well, that's why there was all those people who were like going fucking nuts, like the Bundys, who were like the EPA wanted to come in and take their ranch, and they were like, "No fucking way, man!"
And then the thing is, like, yeah, it's like I don't know. I always had the, you know, kind of like libertarian-y spirit or anarchist kind of spirit in me. So I always loved the people like the Bundys, even like when I wasn't like conservative or whatever. But I was like, I don't know. I couldn't imagine being that age and having lived through
real quickly,
that kind of time.
Real quickly, getting back to the Deutsches Volksbank or whatever. We got a little off track. But I wanted to say that a big thing with having a bank that's not based off of an arbitrary like interest rate lending policy, what you can do is give, because the interest is essentially a tax. If you think about interest and taxes as being interchangeable, you can give what is effectively tax breaks for pro-social behavior. You see this a little bit where when people are married, they get certain tax breaks, and if they have kids, they get certain tax breaks. I don't know exactly even if you get.
Yeah,
I don't.
they motherfucking gave these people so much money.
Yeah, exactly. You can give people a large amount of money,
Yeah.
whereas today, where it's this totally abstracted, over financialized system, the thing that people are getting tax breaks for is like, well, technically this was a business expense, and my money's over in the Cayman Islands, so technically it's not real, it's not money here.
Well, yeah, I mean, the way we're going is like they'd probably rather give you a fucking tax credit if you didn't have a kid. Like
Right,
they
'cause you're
probably
preventing
they
global
want
warming.
to fucking tax you for having kids.
Because you're preventing global warming.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I mean,
And
like
you would,
that's the insidious part of it.
Yeah, they would give you. They do. The government gives these refugee resettlement organizations $50,000 per Somali that they bring over here to throw trash in the lake. Like that's. It's such a perverse system on so many different levels. But that being the concept of being able to use the taxation to promote pro-social behavior, that's a big thing. And
like, that's like the other thing about the whole like libertarian shit that's so annoying is that it's when there's like antisocial behavior and stuff. It's like, yeah, I don't want to criminalize that, but it's important to make that stuff.
Don't glamorize it.
Yeah, I mean, like it's important to make it like frowned upon.
Yeah, if being
it's important to how to say like softly enforce the social norms. I guess is the way that I see it. It's like it's like I don't want to say like, hey, I mean. In an ideal world, I would say like being gay is a sin, or is a crime,
criminal offense. Yeah,
but in like in an application,
well, to be fair, pedophilia is a criminal offense. So same difference.
Like in an application world, it's like I don't want to say that,
right.
But I do want to enforce what is the appropriate way to live.
Well,
and
that's
what a state should be doing, because a state should always be working towards the best way of their people, and the best way of your people, frankly, is not having people fucking, like fucking other people's assholes.
If society promoted being a Chad as a good thing, like half of these bugmen would be Chads.
Yeah,
like I think it's easy. This is part of why we promote normie nationalism. Is that a big part of this whole thing is just changing people's perspectives on what is good, or at least changing the messages that people hear about what is good, because a lot of these people are just followers. Like it's that whole thing that we were talking about,
and you're never going to get away from that.
Yeah, and it's the whole thing
people are.
We were talking about the other day, that it's not necessarily it's not conformity so much as fear of rejection that's motivating a lot of people to and
it's not a bad thing that there's a lot of followers. Like, this is just the way that humanity works, and so these follower mass is fine as long as you have a good leader,
right?
And like, what we're fucking lacking is like pointing society in the correct direction. Because like we have all these bugmen that like we love to make fun of, and they're like fucking pathetic. But it's like, if we had a society that just pointed these people in the right direction, like none of this would be a problem.
Mm-hmm. That's I mean, hey, that's why it's all about the thought crime.
I don't know so much if it's thought crime these days or if it's the face crime.
Oh, yeah, right. That's the real problem. It's the face crime. Well, anyways,
so like my summed up thing is that ultimately, for the solution to the Federal Reserve, I do think the ultimate solution would be it would be taking control of the government in the way that
issuance of currency. Basically, the government needs to control.
Well, no, I'm saying like first you would need the government. You would need some type of coup in the government to take hold that is for the people, and then they'd have to nationalize the Federal Reserve. But since at the end of the day, I'm like an engineer and I have the type of application brain that is there, is that I understand that this is probably something that in my lifetime will never happen. And
well,
so,
you never know. There could be there.
You never know, and I will always fight for that.
The whole thing is that you can reform. I mean, you can reform the Federal Reserve System.
You
could
can,
say
but
you could have an investigation happen 10 years from now that says, look at these insane amounts of fraud and crimes that happened in 2008.
Okay, let me become Ron Paul and then just get shot down.
No, I'm just saying that, like, let's think about this from a different light. That just theoretically, it is possible that you could say, look, these banks have been committing fraud on an unprecedented scale. They need to be liquidated and taken over by the state, and it needs to reform the whole way that the banking system works.
I agree, but I also think like there's people out there that have said that and they have come to no avail. And so
you never know. There still is $10 trillion of unbacked, unpaybackable loans.
Okay, but this is what I just want to try to say is that something that I think is more attainable is if you can work in your own state. Try to get a state bank. North Dakota has it. There's a precedent. Like, can we work all within our own states to get a state bank?
No, that's definitely true.
And that will be the thing that can roll like later into addressing the Federal Reserve question.
Well, that's
the FRQ.
Right. That gets back to the concept of the fear of rejection, as opposed to the pro-conformity mentality is what's motivating all these people. So if you have...
The special thing is we have an example. We have an example.
That's where the importance of building alternative systems comes in. Mm-hmm. Because if you are... Which would you be more afraid of being rejected by? A banking system that's out to fuck you over in every way possible? Or a banking system that's in your community, that's going to support your community projects, and is actually good for people.
Exactly.
You know, it's promoting a more attractive alternative. Okay, so talking about other solutions, one thing I wanted to mention as a problem is the concept of compound interest. I mean, I think it needs to be rethought, just because you hear like a 3% interest rate. Like earlier when we were talking, you end up on a $200,000 loan, you end up paying $140,000 in interest. Mm-hmm. On 3% interest, it seems like you should end up paying, $6,000 in interest, right? Like, where does the rest come? And it comes from compound interest because it exponentially increases and all this stuff. Mm-hmm. And so that needs to be, I think, really reconsidered. Either extending the time it takes for the interest to compound, or doing a thing where something. Because I understand there's an incentive for people to pay off the loan sooner rather than later with compound interest, but it doesn't work. I mean, either you need to drastically lower the interest rates or something, because that's just absurd. And just as for when this is in the archives and Kali Xenu Hitler has ascended to the golden throne. But aside from that, when we're thinking about steps that we can take individually and right now, I think either starting, working to start one of those banks, one of those state banks. Petitioning to start one.
Get involved in your community. Try to get a state bank started. In the very bare bones, do not bank with large banks. Look for your community credit union, your community bank.
And there's, an interesting thing too is that there's these nonprofit companies that do micro loans to people in Micronesia, and for some reason that's a really great thing that they're putting out these low interest loans for $400 to people out halfway across the world.
I'm just gonna say in my own experience though too, it's like since I recently moved, so like for a while I was very shamefully. I had my money in some of these larger banks because I was moving around a lot, and it was more convenient. And I understand that that's just a excuse, and I shame my old self for doing that. But anyway, so when I moved recently, I put my money into a local credit union, and dude, the interest rates in the savings account was just like incredibly higher.
Wow.
Like, I mean, when I was like with one of these larger banks, I was making probably like $1 a month,
Mm-hmm.
like in interest. In this like credit union, I'm making like $10 a month.
There you go.
Like, yeah, I mean, like it's not like anything to live by or anything, but like it's huge, and it's like a huge increase from that, and it's also like it's actually like you're putting your money into like an institution that's not like gutting what remains of your country.
Right.
And so that to me is like the absolute bare bones step every single person can take is find your local credit union, just bank with them.
Mm-hmm.
And like that
so
right there is a decent step.
Right. And then talking about like these, these micro loan companies and things like that, like maybe that would be a good thing to look into starting. That this doesn't specifically have to work for third world countries. Like, why? What's the moral imperative to lend out money to people from third world countries? Like, kids be starving here, right?
Yep.
And okay, so then in addition to that, it's like if you're well off financially, maybe you have a couple $1,000s in savings in the bank, and somebody that you trust, somebody that's like close to you, if they need to borrow a couple $1,000s to buy a car or something like that, why not have them borrow it from you instead of a bank? Maybe you charge a fixed interest rate. Maybe it's 10% interest. You're going to make $200 off the deal. That's a pretty good return on investment. I mean, considering a lot of these, like you have these investment vehicles that people do. They put their 401k and they get 1% interest on the whole thing at the end of the year or whatever. They get 1% return from these big hedge funds. And then, 2008 happened. Oh, hey, retirement fund. Oh, that's gone. That's gone now.
Yeah.
Why don't you lend?
I refused to use the 401k that my company was offering. I was like, I understand that you have like a pretty decent matching thing, but it's like, I don't trust you people at this point.
Right, and you're feeding the beast at that point.
Like
you're feeding more money and more
I
legitimacy.
I do not fucking support the fact that companies have just decided to tell you that your fucking retirement plan is the stock market. Like,
yeah.
Fuck you.
Right, and you also, I mean, that's a whole thing too, is that you'll notice that these
I could use that money smarter than the fucking stock market could.
These financial crises happen at certain intervals that just happens to wipe out everybody's retirement funds, just one after another. Like, but yeah, so lending out some of that money yourself. If you lend somebody $2,000 and they pay you back 10% interest over the course of a year, like that's 10% return. That's better than your 401k is going to do.
Or even if you lend out to people in your community and you foster a good community, even if you like have a 0% interest for a example,
mm-hmm.
It's like you're fostering an actual community. Like, the problem with things like this, like central banking and stuff, is like we live in these communities that are so disconnected.
Yeah.
Like if we could just connect our communities a little bit more. Like at the risk of sounding like some stupid hippie, it's like, we just like need to connect more on a community level and
mm-hmm.
like understand like the common struggle and strife.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. Like, I mean, like it's just there, and it's like something that we seem to be kind of shrugging off at this point.
Mm-hmm. You're just shirking your responsibility to the community at large, or your civilization at large. And then another thing is the concept of rent to own, or where the owner of the house is the financer of the mortgage. You don't need to have a bank to sell a house. Like if you own a house, or if you're looking to upgrade your house, you might have to take the brunt of the the initial. I'm misspeaking here, but basically, if you know somebody who's looking to buy a house and you're looking to sell your house, like you could sell them your house, do a rent to own thing, something like that, being the financial institution instead of the banks.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a couple of ideas that I had in terms of ways that we can start to divest from this corrupt system.
and yeah. No.
Yeah.
But in general, I do think that fighting for a state bank within your state is something that isn't futile because North Dakota has one. Like, why can't we all fight for that within our own states?
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a precedent, and I think there is an example that it works, and it works well, and it is some type of immediate relief to a lot of these larger problems. But I think the larger problems will always exist, and we do need to, ultimately, like, nationalizing, like, having a good government, nationalizing the Fed is, like, what we should work for. But, in the intermediate time, working for these state banks, I really think is the solution within this country.
Mm-hmm.
It's all just to me, it seems like the best decision.
It goes all the way through. It's like people have different skill sets. They're in different positions in their lives. There's different things that they can do, but everybody should be doing something to move things in the right direction.
Yeah.
Because the society that we're living in right now is just like unsustainable. It's like unsustainably corrupt and terrible to the people who live in it. And we need to be doing what we can to help our fellow people and to move things forward and to move things in the right direction. And on that note,
well put.
And on that note, you have been listening to Thought Crime, episode 22, Usury Special. It's been a pleasure. Margaret, you want to say anything to the audience here?
Yeah, okay, I'm going to charge you interest on that pleasure.
All right, so we will be playing the next 1.4 hours of this podcast again in interest on repeat. Like that Hidden Colors video is just going to play again.
You all signed up for it.
All right, well, anyways, on that note, from me, Donald Reagan.
And me, Margaret Thrasher.
You have been listening to Thought Crime. Signing off.
Assoluto cosmico, regolare realtà, respiro di un'immagine, sincronia di civiltà, confusa progenie di cellule ribelli, volo verso l'universo, l'attraverserò, stessa stella, fatti vedere.